Hello everyone, and welcome back to Haunted Sleep. I know many of you tune in to these stories to help you drift off to sleep, so before you settle in, I'd love for each of you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. It all started in 2008, when my mother and I moved into a new home in Bradford, England. I was 17 at the time. The house was a standard 2-bedroom property that needed a lot of modernizing, which we took care of before moving in. In the meantime, we got to know our neighbors and the area. When we spoke to the neighbors, they told us about the previous tenant, an older man who had lived there for many years. He was an alcoholic and had died in the house from alcohol poisoning. His 10-year-old son had found him 2 weeks later, dead in his bedroom. My mother and I were shocked and deeply saddened by this story. Since we are strong believers in God, we decided to invite the local priest to bless the house. The first few weeks in the house were horrible. I couldn't sleep at night. I constantly felt like I was being watched, as if something was frightening me, but I couldn't see anything. The worst part was the physical reaction. I'd feel my heart race, my skin would crawl, and sweat would pour from me. Is that how our bodies react to the paranormal? Many times I'd run into my mother's bedroom, frightened, and asked to sleep in her bed. I know I was 17, but it felt like I couldn't be in my own room alone. My mom would try to convince me it was all in my head, sometimes reading prayers from the Bible in my room. At that point, she hadn't experienced anything strange herself. After a few weeks, something odd happened. My mother and I came back from shopping and noticed a terrible smell coming from upstairs. We quickly went upstairs to find where it was coming from, but we couldn't identify the source. The smell was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. It lingered in the bathroom, the bedrooms, and the landing. The strange thing was that it never filled every room like a normal smell would. It would only be in one room at a time. My mom ended up bleaching everything upstairs, but the smell still comes and goes, always in the same rooms, never spreading evenly. It's as if it just appears whenever it pleases. Over the 8 years we've lived here, we've encountered other strange things. There have been unexplained banging noises at night, the sound of cupboards opening and closing in the kitchen, and my mom often hears shuffling sounds in the walk-in wardrobe in her room, even though there's nothing in there that could make that noise. But the creepiest experience happened one night, and it's something that neither my mom nor I could explain. It was around 11 p.m., and my mom was getting ready for bed. Before going to sleep, she would always check that the front and back doors were locked, which she did that night. After she went to bed, I was sitting on the couch, browsing the internet on my laptop. I was only about 3 feet from the kitchen door, which was slightly open. After a few minutes, I felt the urge to go into the kitchen for a drink. I got up, opened the kitchen door, and was shocked to find a toy from the cupboard under the stairs making noise. This toy only makes noise when it's turned on, but it was blaring music. To make it even stranger, there was water spilled all over the kitchen floor, and the back door was wide open. At first, I thought someone had broken in and hidden in the cupboard under the stairs. I ran upstairs to wake my mom, telling her that I thought we'd been robbed. My mom grabbed a bat for protection, and we went downstairs together. We hesitated as we opened the cupboard, shouting, "Who's there? We've called the police!" But there was no one in the cupboard, and the toy was still playing music. I looked outside, but I couldn't see anyone. The back door, which is a heavy fire door, had been opened wide, but it would have been impossible to open it without kicking it repeatedly. What really bothered me was that I was only 3 feet away from the kitchen, and I didn't hear anything. I didn't hear the door open, I didn't hear the water spill, and my cat had been upstairs the entire time. The toy only started making noise once I entered the kitchen. To this day, I can't explain how all of that happened. I truly believe it was part of some kind of poltergeist activity. I've since learned that the man who died in the house was named Mr. O'Brien. We still receive his mail. I believe that Mr. O'Brien still resides in the house, unaware of our presence. This is what is called a residual haunting, where the spirit doesn't interact with the living but simply repeats the same actions, like a loop. We still hear random bangs and shuffling noises at night, and the distinct smell comes and goes. But after 8 years, we're no longer scared. We've learned to live with it, and we accept this entity as part of our home, at least until we eventually leave. It all started a few days after I moved out of my parents' house. One afternoon, I was exploring the attic when I came across a large bookshelf filled with old, dusty books. Most of them were covered in thick layers of dust, but one item caught my eye. It was an Ouija board. I climbed up on a ladder to get a closer look, and to my surprise, the board was the only item that wasn't covered in dust. This house hadn't had an owner for 50 years before we moved in, so it seemed impossible that anyone could have cleaned it. I took the board downstairs and immediately felt uneasy. I told my partner about it, but he thought I was just trying to scare him. He laughed it off, until he saw it for himself. We tried to brush it off, but it was hard to ignore the uneasy feeling it left behind. That night, a thunderstorm kept me up, and when I finally managed to fall asleep, my partner left to visit his seriously ill mother. I was alone in the house. At around 2:30 a.m., I woke up suddenly, feeling as if something had touched me. The room turned icy cold, so I went downstairs and slept on the couch. A little while later, around 3 a.m., I woke up again for no reason. I looked up and saw a black figure standing next to me. I reached out to touch it, but as my hand got closer, the figure seemed to melt into the background. The next morning, I told my partner about it. He freaked out, and we both agreed that we needed to use the Ouija board to try and communicate with whatever it was. We waited until midnight to set up the board. When we asked the entity what its name was, it spelled out Zozo. We continued to ask it questions. At first, the demon seemed kind, but when we asked it to leave, it suddenly responded with a loud "No," and we began to hear strange banging noises coming from the attic. We knew letting go of the planchette would be dangerous, so we kept asking questions. As we wrote down its responses, we asked it who it wanted. It spelled out the name, Lily, my name. After a few more hours of questioning, we decided to stop. The next day, my partner left again to visit his mother, and once again, I was alone in the house. Nothing too strange happened, but in the morning, I woke up to loud banging on the front door. It was my partner, but we hadn't locked the door the night before, which was odd. What was even stranger was that all the windows were locked. We had never been given a key to lock the windows, yet I found the key sitting on the coffee table in front of the couch, where I had been sleeping, due to the freezing cold. A lot more strange things have happened since then, but I'm saving those for another story. These early experiences showed me just how dangerous it can be to keep an Ouija board in your home. I still contact Zozo occasionally, but I don't make the sessions last more than 15 minutes for safety. Each time I try to leave, Zozo gets less and less kind, but for now, I'm not ready to make him leave entirely. I've been sensing a presence in the hallway for a while now. At first, it was just a feeling, no sounds or sights, just the unmistakable sense that something was watching me. I could even sense where it was in the hallway as I moved from my room to the bathroom. I don't think it's anything malicious, but I don't get the sense that it likes me either. Lately, though, I've been going through a tough time. My boyfriend and I broke up after nearly 2 years, and I've been having a lot of arguments with my dad, which led to him throwing me out of the house after one particularly bad fight. I also got kicked off my course at college, and I've slipped back into some self-destructive habits that I don't want to talk about here. About a week after I got kicked off the course, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. It wasn't the kind of fear-inducing feeling, but it was unsettling. I could actually feel eyes on me, usually coming from the corner between my parents' and my brother's bedrooms. This would have been fine, but then the noises started. Thumps coming from the hallway, like someone pounding their fist against the walls. The noise is so loud that it's woken me up several times. My brother has heard it too, but we're both just as clueless about what's causing it. With no clear explanation and nothing particularly wrong, we just shrugged it off and carried on. Then the whispering began. It's always too low to hear clearly, but it definitely comes from the hall. My dad, brother, and I have all blamed each other for it, but it always seems to stop the moment one of us opens the door and checks. It's always a male voice, and it's always too faint to catch any words, but it's there. Around the same time, I started sensing the presence in my room as well. I'm pretty sure it's the same one from the hallway. It's always in the corner by my door, and I know it's watching me. I've felt it move around my room a few times, and there are occasional whispers still too low to make out. This has become a common occurrence over the past few weeks. I've learned to expect my room to go darker around 1 a.m., to feel the presence there, and for it to leave after a few minutes. It's become something I can coexist with peacefully. It may not seem to like me, but I don't fear it. But then something happened a few weeks ago that made me wonder if it wants something from me. I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom around 1:30 a.m. My brother and dad were already in bed, and my mum was downstairs. The door was open, so I could see the hallway clearly, and you'd have to pass the bathroom to get to my room. Suddenly, there was a massive crash coming from my room. It shook the floor, and it was so loud that it woke everyone up. We rushed into my room to find that my bass amp had been knocked over. This is the first time anything in the room has been moved. Since then, the whispering and noises in the hallway have been happening more frequently, and I've been feeling the presence in my room more often too. Sometimes, I think I've seen it. It stands in the corner by the door, just like I usually feel it. It doesn't make me feel afraid, just unsettled. I don't really fear it, but I can't shake the feeling that it's watching me. It's like a dark shadow, the only way I can describe it. I don't see any eyes, but I can feel its gaze. The sightings have only happened a couple of times, and usually, I just sense it there. Sometimes, it moves and stands by the bookshelf on the other side of the room. In December 2013, my wife Jim, our 6-month-old daughter, and I moved into our first home, a small, 2-bedroom semi-detached house in West Sussex. The house is a typical 2-up, 2-down, and although it's small, it's our first home, which makes it special to us. We're not particularly sensitive to paranormal things, and Jem isn't interested in anything of that nature as it scares her, so I've respected that and never really discussed it with her. Since moving in, I've noticed small things that have caught my attention. The first was a strange smell of tobacco smoke in the kitchen. It wasn't a fleeting scent, like what you might expect from old furniture or relics of previous owners. It was a strong, fresh smell, like someone had just lit a cigarette in the room. Neither of us smoke, and I hoped our baby hadn't started either. I called Jem to see if she could smell it too, and she briefly caught the scent before it disappeared. I checked the windows and doors to make sure they were all shut, and I even checked the laundry bin for any smoky clothes. The only thing I could think of was the neighbor smoking, and maybe the smell drifted in, though it seemed strange that it would only linger in the kitchen. Fast forward a few months, and the smell of smoke still comes and goes. I think I figured that out. Then, the door handles on the upstairs rooms started making a squeaky sound when they were pulled down. Nothing unusual, really, but it became a problem when this noise would be amplified at night. The sound would often disturb our baby, especially when I went to check on her before bed. Even worse, the squeak would continue on her door after I had already gone to bed. It was loud enough to wake me, and I'd end up walking around in the dark, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. When I finally found the source, I would sit and watch as the handle would seem to move on its own, making a squeaky sound every few minutes, as if someone was barely pressing on it. At first, I convinced myself it was just a technical issue. Maybe the door frame was uneven, or the spring inside the handle was old and stretching. So, the next day, I removed all the upstairs door handles, lubricated them with WD-40, and replaced them. No more squeaks, problem solved. But a few nights later, the sound returned. This time, I found the handle on my daughter's door moving just a tiny bit, enough to cause a sound. I thought maybe the spring inside was too tight, causing the handle to push down slightly on its own. It bothered me enough to swap the handle with one from a less used door downstairs, and after that, the problem stopped. I haven't heard or seen the handle move since. A few months later, I was putting away laundry in our bedroom one evening when Jem screamed upstairs for me to check on our daughter. Panicked, I ran to her room and found G peacefully asleep in her bed. Jem explained that she had heard a soothing "shh" sound coming from the baby monitor, and it had gotten louder over time. At first, she thought it was me, but when she checked the monitor, she saw nothing. I tried to explain it away as possibly a cross signal, but Jem wasn't sure. She insists she heard it, and I don't doubt her. By March, G was nearly 3, walking and talking, and generally becoming more independent. One afternoon, while Jem was at work, I was downstairs in the living room while G was playing in the kitchen. She came into the room, closed the baby gate behind her, and turned to me, asking calmly, "Where did she go?" I was confused and asked, "Who, darling?" To which she replied, "Blonde Mammy." Now, Jem has always been a brunette, so this was odd. I asked her who Blonde Mammy was, and she didn't give me any further details, just asking to watch something on TV. I've asked her about it since, but she never brings it up again. It could have been just her imagination, but it was strange and totally unexpected. In June, we welcomed our second daughter, M. After some complications, Jem and M came home, and we began the dreaded night shift routine, where one of us stays up while the other sleeps. While I was on night duty, I began to feel a strange sensation. I was asleep between the 3-hour feeds when I was gently pushed, just enough to wake me. This happened at least 4 times, each time right as M started to stir for her next bottle. The push felt like someone pressing down sharply at the top of my arms. I was half asleep, so maybe it could have been a jolt from M crying, but it definitely felt like a push. I mentioned it to Jem, but she said she hadn't experienced anything like that. About 3 weeks ago, Jem's parents did the night shift for us so we could both sleep. Around 6 a.m., I woke up naturally. I was lying on my side with my back to the door, facing an already awake Jem. I was half asleep, but I remember clearly saying, "He stood behind me." I felt the presence of someone at the door, though I had no negative or positive feelings about it. I simply felt the need to tell Jem. She freaked out, asking me not to scare her, as she knows I don't like talking about such things. I wondered if I was still partly dreaming. Just a few nights ago, Jem asked me what I had said over the baby monitor while she was reading to G. She heard me speaking but couldn't make out the words. I was doing chores, and I hadn't said anything. I tried to explain it as a cross signal, but even Jem is uncertain about it. Since the very first day we moved in, I've developed a strange habit of shutting the door leading from the living room to the stairs before bed. If I forget to do this, I can't rest until the door is closed. I know it's a basic safety precaution, but I've never been this obsessive about doors before. It almost feels like I need to shut it, or something bad might happen. I can't explain it. I've been haunted by paranormal experiences that I can't seem to forget. No matter how much time passes, some things just can't be unseen. Spirits, demons, or whatever they may be, are beyond the understanding of anyone living. I'm a firm believer that seeing is believing, and for those of you who are skeptical, I hope this story makes you reconsider. Maybe a family member, a friend, or even a stranger has told you that they've seen a ghost, and you probably thought it was ridiculous. I can completely understand why you would think that. My childhood was pretty ordinary, but everything changed after my encounters with the paranormal. The way I thought, the way I saw the world, it all shifted. I was blind, but now I see. There are events in my life that I can't compare to anyone else's. Things that would send a chill down your spine. But every day, I try to move on and forget them, even though some things are impossible to forget. My family owns an old house on the north shore of Scotland, in a place called Melness. Not many people have heard of it, but once you visit, it's the kind of place you'll never forget. It's mostly highlands, fields, and beaches, pure, untouched nature. I can still smell the salty Atlantic Sea, and I'll never forget the shipwreck that lay on the sandy shore. There was a house next door to ours that was abandoned for as long as I can remember. No one dared to buy it or go inside. It was a place that everyone feared, and I can't say exactly why. The house was built from ancient stones, and although it seemed ordinary from the outside, whenever I looked at it, there was always something unsettling. Even on bright days, no one could ever see inside. To this day, the place remains a mystery I'm too afraid to solve. Growing up in Melness, my dad used to tell me terrifying stories about strange things that happened there when he was a boy. One story he told me that stuck with me was about a cave on the beach, which is said to be haunted. One day, when he was a boy, my dad decided to explore the cave. Inside, there was a very dark corner, a hole in the cave wall, pitch black, where no man dared go. Although he was scared, my dad decided to throw some sand into the hole, thinking it was just an animal den. To his surprise, the sand was thrown back at him. Alone and terrified, he ran out of the cave. He's been back to the cave a few times since, but the hole was never there again, and it's something that still spooks him to this day. My first paranormal experience happened in the house in Melness. Everyone in my family had heard strange noises or seen things that didn't make sense, but we never talked much about it. The house was cozy, at least on the surface. When you first walked in, you'd see the bathroom directly under the stairs. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. Downstairs, the kitchen was on the right, and the living room on the left. In the living room, there was an old red curtain that separated the room from the conservatory. That's where I had my first truly terrifying encounter. One night, my family was asleep, me, my sister, my dad, and my papa. I was only 6 years old. I woke up in the middle of the night, and went downstairs to use the bathroom. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I noticed that the curtain leading to the conservatory was blowing as if the door had been left open. When I looked, I saw that the door was wide open. This was strange because we always made sure to lock all doors before bed. I quickly closed the door and went back to bed, thinking nothing of it. The next morning, my dad called me downstairs. He asked if I had been up in the night, and when I went to check the conservatory, I was shocked to see that the door and all the windows were wide open. I had no explanation for it. That night, something similar happened. Every kitchen cupboard was left open. I was too young to understand it fully, but I knew this wasn't a coincidence. The first time I actually saw a spirit was in a different house, one I lived in with my mom and stepdad. I had always thought that the spirit from Melness followed me, and I was starting to believe it more and more. One night, while walking past the living room on my way to the bathroom, I glanced through the textured glass door. I could see shapes, the couches, the table, but what caught my eye was a tall, dark figure, almost like someone wearing a robe or a dress. I froze. It turned to face me, and I screamed at the top of my lungs. I ran straight to my mom's room and jumped between her and my stepdad, still screaming. My stepdad went to check the living room, but by the time he returned, the figure was gone. It was like it had never been there, but the chill in the room told me something was wrong. Years later, I saw the same dark figure again. I was about 9 years old back in Melness. I asked my stepbrother to come downstairs with me while I used the bathroom. As I washed my hands, I heard banging and screaming at the door. It was my stepbrother, who had seen something that terrified him. When I opened the door, I saw the same dark figure outside the front door. We both hid in the bathroom, barricading the door with anything we could find, and we stayed there for hours, not daring to open it. I was relieved that my stepbrother had seen the same thing. It made me feel like I wasn't imagining it. From then on, I was certain it was following me. But who or what was it? Why was it following me? I tried researching at the library, but I didn't find anything that explained it. Later, I came across the term, shadow people, and although I didn't believe in demons, it seemed to match what I'd experienced. Still, I couldn't find an explanation that made sense to me. The last time I saw this spirit was in May of last year. After nearly 9 years of peace, it returned. I was staying at a friend's house, sitting on his bed, getting ready to go out. His room was dark, and I was looking into my small mirror when I suddenly felt an itch on my back. When I looked up into the mirror, I saw it, the same dark figure, standing right behind me. I was terrified. It felt like it had touched me. My friend thought I was crazy, and we lost contact soon after. But it seems like whatever has been following me might never stop. A few months ago, I moved into my own flat with my boyfriend. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, I decided I had had enough and needed to write about these haunting experiences. One night, while I was getting ready to go out, I was in the living room doing my makeup. My cat suddenly made a strange noise. I went to check on her, and she was hiding behind the blinds, terrified. I looked around, checked the walk-in cupboard, and then went back to my makeup. I sat down again, but as I was putting on my foundation, I heard a loud bang, like a door slamming shut. I looked through the door and saw that the cupboard door had slammed, even though my cat was on the bed, staring at it. I was startled, and when I looked back at my makeup mirror, I saw a large crack running through it. I rushed to get my cat outside and immediately told my boyfriend what had happened. A few days later, the windows in the flat started unlocking on their own. These events have made me question whether whatever has been following me all these years will ever stop. I've tried to ignore it, but it's hard to shake the feeling that something is always just behind me, watching. A few years ago, I found myself in a difficult situation, homeless, and relying on the kindness of friends. I moved around a lot, staying in different places in Edinburgh and Fife. Eventually, I met a girl who offered me a place to stay at her flat in Leith, and I gratefully accepted. Her flat was small but cozy, and after settling in, we had a glass of wine and chatted. She showed me to the room where I would be staying. The room was at the end of a long corridor, which led from the living room to the bathroom, with the kitchen and 2 bedrooms branching off from it. The room itself was large and simply furnished, with a single bed, a wardrobe, and a chest of drawers. There was a door in the far left corner with some shallow shelves inside, and a large bay window next to it. I thanked her, we said our goodnights, and I went to bed. There was nothing unusual about the room at first, just a peaceful, normal atmosphere. But when I closed the door behind me, everything changed. Almost immediately, the temperature dropped, and a heavy, oppressive feeling filled the room, like I was locked in, surrounded by sadness. It was a strange, morose atmosphere, almost like a fog that enveloped the entire room. I was exhausted and just wanted to sleep, so I lay down on the bed, which was positioned directly opposite the door, and closed my eyes. I eventually fell asleep, but when I woke up the next morning, the door was wide open. I assumed my friend had checked on me, or maybe the door wasn't hung properly and had swung open by itself, so I didn't think much of it. The next night, however, things took a strange turn. When I went to the room, the door was still closed, as I had left it. I closed it behind me again, but once more, the oppressive, suffocating feeling returned. This time, I tried to ignore it and went to bed. But as I lay there, I suddenly became aware of someone watching me. I turned to the right, and there, in the darkness, I saw the apparition of a person sitting on the floor next to the cupboard. The figure was curled up, knees to their chests, arms wrapped around their legs, and their heads slightly tilted so I could only see the top of it. The figure slowly began to rise, cautiously watching me as it did. It moved toward me in a slow, almost fearful way, as though it didn't want to be seen but had no choice but to approach. I was completely frozen, staring at this figure. I even pinched myself to make sure I wasn't dreaming. The door creaked, and I briefly looked away, and when I looked back, the figure was gone. The heavy feeling in the room remained, but I opened the door, and the tension lifted instantly. The next morning, I told my friend about the experience. She looked at me wide-eyed. "So I guess you know about this then?" she said. She explained that the room had once been hers. but she couldn't stay in it longer than 3 nights because she felt it was haunted. I didn't sleep in that room again, choosing instead to sleep on the sofa for the rest of my stay. A few weeks later, my 2 friends, who were about to be kicked out of their flat, asked if they could stay with me. I spoke to my friend, and she was happy to have them. They moved in and took the room I had vacated. For the first couple of weeks, neither of us mentioned anything strange about the room. But one night, my friend's boyfriend, who had been living in the flat, came to me looking confused. He had been about to use the bathroom when he noticed the door to the bedroom was closed. He asked me to come with him, and we both stood by the door, feeling a sense of unease. "Do you feel that?" he asked. I nodded. "You feel it too, then?" he said, and we began talking about the strange feeling in the room when the door was closed, the sense of fear and dread that seemed to hang in the air. He wasn't the only one who felt it. My friends confirmed they had experienced the same feelings. We sat together for about an hour discussing the room and the eerie atmosphere that surrounded it. A couple of days later, my friend's boyfriend was making a cup of tea in the kitchen when he suddenly felt as though someone was standing in the doorway, watching him. He turned around, and as he did, he saw a shadow move up the hall toward the bedroom. When he went to investigate, there was no one there. One evening, I was in the flat alone, watching TV, when I became aware of a presence watching me from the living room door. I turned around, but of course, no one was there. I decided to speak to it. I told it that no one in the flat was there to harm it, that the flat was its home and we were just visitors. I invited it into the room and reassured it that it could come and go as it pleased. I felt a strong presence in the room with me, so I continued talking. I got the impression it was a young girl who had been locked in that bedroom, mistreated, and had died in the bathroom for reasons I couldn't understand. My friends, who also felt the presence, agreed with me. After speaking with her for about an hour, the atmosphere in the room felt less oppressive. It was still there, but the feeling was more peaceful, as if the spirit was no longer scared. We continued to feel her presence in the bedroom and bathroom, but it was calmer. After a while, we all left the flat to go on with our lives. Before we left, we said our goodbyes to the ghost, whose home we had been staying in. Back in the 70s, when I was just a little boy, my family lived in a small council house in Dechmont, West Lothian. The house was about 125 years old, and I must have been no older than 2 when the event I'm about to share took place. Even though I was so young, the memory remains vivid in my mind, as clear as the night it happened. My bedroom was small, a box room next to my parents' room. It was cramped, with barely enough space for my cot bed and a chest of drawers. There was a small built-in wardrobe to the right when you entered the room, and beside that, an alcove with a few shelves and my drawers underneath. A small window faced the outside, and I vividly remember the Action Man wallpaper and curtains I had. One evening, my dad tucked me into bed and left the door slightly open to let in a bit of light from the hallway. I quickly fell asleep. Some time later, I woke up to a hand on my right shoulder. I was lying on my left side, facing away from the door. When I turned around, expecting to see one of my parents, I was shocked to find an old woman I had never seen before, leaning over the bars of my cot, looking down at me. She had a heavily wrinkled face, with her hair pulled into a messy bun. She wore a typical granny-style apron and a dress with the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. I screamed in terror, shouting for my dad. The woman, her face almost sorrowful, slowly backed away from me, bringing her finger to her lips and whispering, "SHHHHHH, SHHHHHH." As she went, she continued to back into the far corner of the room, still urging me to be quiet, and then, without warning, she disappeared into the darkness of the corner. By the time my dad rushed into the room, she was gone. I was still terrified. My dad searched the entire room, checking the window, which was locked, and the wardrobe, which was empty. There was no sign of anyone hiding anywhere. The house always felt strange to me, especially the cupboard under the stairs. Apparently, When the house was built in the 1930s to house medical staff from the nearby Bangor Hospital, the kitchen door was located at the end of the hall, near the staircase. However, sometime in the 1960s, the council redeveloped the house, and the kitchen became accessible only through the living room, with the cupboard under the stairs directly opposite the living room door. I never felt comfortable going anywhere near the cupboard unless my dad was around. Every time I walked past that part of the hall, a feeling of dread would wash over me. I would always run as fast as I could from the living room to the stairs and hurry up or down them. I never saw anything, but the terror I felt was real. Occasionally, my older sister would lock me in the cupboard as a prank, and once, the door got stuck. I could feel someone watching me from inside. I heard breathing, and I could tell there was something, or someone, there with me. When I finally managed to open the door, I bolted out, convinced my sister had locked me in, but she swore she hadn't. Years later, after we had moved out, my aunt mentioned something strange. She had been talking to a local resident about the area of Deckmont, and had asked specifically about the house we had lived in. The woman told her that a couple had lived there in the late 40s through the mid-70s. They couldn't have children, though the wife desperately wanted them. Eventually, the wife became bitter and resentful of her husband because he was unable to have children. She locked him in the cupboard under the stairs for days at a time, only feeding him bread and water, letting him out briefly, and then locking him away again when her anger returned. The wife was described as a stereotypical granny figure, often seen with her hair in a bun and constantly wearing an apron as she did housework. She died sometime in the late 60s, and it was said that she passed away in the house, found in the front box room, the very same room that later became my bedroom. Ever since I was a little girl, I'd been followed by a dark presence, one that seemed to move with me from house to house. It all started when I was around 5 years old, right after my parents had separated. We moved back to Wigan, and at first, we lived with my grandparents. Eventually, my granddad found us a very old, dilapidated farmhouse dating back to around 1700. He refurbished it for us, and we moved in. My bedroom was on the first floor, separated from my parents' and brother's rooms on the other side of the house. It was a small box room, barely big enough for my cot bed and a chest of drawers. There was a small built-in wardrobe near the door and an alcove with shelves, which I remember fondly. The room felt quite ordinary at first, but there was always something off about it. From the start, I was terrified of a cupboard in my room. It always seemed to have a door slightly ajar, no matter how often I closed it. At night, I would lie in bed, paralyzed with fear, unable to move or even breathe. I could feel something hovering over my bed, watching me. I didn't see it, but I could feel it, a presence that was incredibly dark and oppressive. I would have nightmares every night, waking up terrified, sensing that something was there, just out of sight. For years, this continued, with my mother dismissing my fears. She had experienced her own paranormal encounters as a child, so she thought she would know if there was something in the house. I think she was either trying to comfort me or perhaps just didn't want to believe that something was there. Despite my mom's assurances, the presence remained, and I wasn't the only one who noticed strange things. There were times when lights would turn on or off by themselves, and the staircase to my room was always creepy. I hated walking up it alone. Years later, my dad admitted that sometimes, while watching TV, he'd suddenly feel an overwhelming sensation of being watched from the bottom of the stairs. It was the same feeling I had experienced, and he couldn't shake it. When I was around 10, we moved to another house in Cumbria, hoping for a fresh start, thinking the thing would leave me behind. But no, the paranormal activity followed us. The house was still being refurbished, so we initially stayed in a caravan in the backyard. After a few weeks, my brother and I started hearing tapping on the window behind our beds. At first, we blamed each other for the noises, but soon we ruled that out. We even tried to convince ourselves it was just the wind blowing something loose, but when we checked, there was nothing there. After we moved into the house, the tapping continued. I began to sense the presence again, both at night and during the day when I was home alone. Sometimes I would hear what I thought was my dad walking up the stairs, even hearing the change jingling in his pocket. But when I looked around, no one was there. One night, while I was in the bathroom, I even heard the tapping while I was relaxing in the bath. One evening, I was in my bedroom when I heard a loud bang on the wall behind me, which connected to the hallway and had a radiator on it. I rushed out, thinking the radiator had fallen off the wall, but everything was intact. The bang was so loud, there's no way it could have been the radiator. After that, the tapping subsided. Around this time, I began seeing faces, sharp, clear images of faces I had never seen before. They were often grotesque, vaguely terrifying, and always accompanied by a feeling of deep sadness and darkness. They weren't trying to scare me, but they wanted to be seen, almost like they were reaching out for attention. After we moved again, I lived in a shared house. The presence followed me. I still had nightmares, and weird things continued to happen. Music would play by itself, things would go missing, only to turn up in odd places. The other residents also experienced strange events, and we often discussed them. One night, while I was sitting on my bed, I felt a strange energy rush through me. It was unlike anything I had ever felt before, a sensation of being physically overwhelmed by something. I later came to believe it was the presence of an old man. To my shock, a few weeks later, a taxi driver picked me up and mentioned that the last time he had been to the house, an old man had died there, and they had wheeled him out. I never told him anything about the house. Whether it was just coincidence or not, it added to the eerie feeling. Later, I met someone new, and we moved in together. I was pregnant, and one night I woke up from a terrifying, vivid dream. In the dream, there was a glowing, white presence in the corner of the room. I was too scared to look at it, but I felt like it was somehow projecting energy at me. I woke up with the sensation still lingering, and it was incredibly unsettling. After our daughter was born, the toys in her room started turning on by themselves. But the most bizarre incident happened one day when I was feeding her in the kitchen. She was sitting in her high chair, and suddenly, she started looking over my shoulder and giggling. She reached out her hand and offered food to someone off to my left, all the while making eye contact and laughing. A second later, the heavy glass door behind her slammed shut on its own. It had never moved before, and it never moved again after that. Strangely, instead of being terrified, I felt a calmness wash over me. It was almost as if whatever was there meant no harm. After that, we moved again, but the presence still lingered. One day, while I was in the kitchen, I looked out the window and saw a black mass moving down the rockery in the front garden. It moved like mist but was darker than anything I'd ever seen. It curled around the rocks before disappearing beneath one. To this day, I can't explain what it was. Another night, while lying in bed, I heard a horrible laugh come from nowhere. I rushed to turn on the bedroom light, but it blew out. I went to the stairs to turn on that light, and it blew too. I was left in complete darkness, feeling as though something was watching me. I rushed downstairs and managed to turn the lights on there, but I spent the rest of the night terrified. The next day, I heard tapping on the window again, and I felt the presence right behind me. Eventually, my partner and I split up, and I met someone else. When we lived together, the experiences faded, but one night, I had a vivid dream. In the dream, I was led by the hand by a small child. I saw my boyfriend asleep on the couch, and I also saw myself, except there was an old man standing over me, in a brown hooded robe. I was terrified in the dream and tried to wake my boyfriend, but my hands kept going through his shoulders. When I woke up, I could feel a dark energy pressing on me, almost as if it was trying to merge with me. It took a long time for that sensation to go away. A few nights later, I read about calling on Jesus for protection if you feel harassed by a presence. At 3 a.m., terrified after the dream, I decided to try it, even though I wasn't religious. I mentally called for Jesus to help me, and to my astonishment, the dark energy left my body. It was as if the presence was physically bounced out. Since that night, the oppressive feelings and negative thoughts have faded significantly. Though I still sometimes see the faces, the constant fear and anxiety are gone. I now understand that the energy you put out can make all the difference. Positive feelings seem to repel the dark spirits, and since that day, I've felt much more at peace. I grew up in a small rural village in Somerset, England. It had just one shop, a primary school, a Church of England church, a village hall, and a pub. It wasn't a bustling town, just a quiet place perched on a hill at the start of the Mendip Hills. The hill had a rich, sometimes strange history, full of tales about witches, pagans, druids, and mysterious happenings. Some of the street names even reflect this curious past. As children, our imaginations were often fed by these old stories, whether true or just local legends. My friends and I grew up with a lot to think about, and these stories fueled our childhood fears. I'd like to go back one day to see how much the place has changed, and to see if I still feel the same strange atmosphere there as I did when I was younger. My first experience with the paranormal happened in the churchyard. The church itself was built in 1482, and its tall, Gothic tower was visible from the Severn estuary, guiding ships toward Bristol. The tower was the only original part of the church. The main building was completely rebuilt in 1861. The church is pretty to look at, but the atmosphere around it, especially in the graveyard, was something else entirely. It was here that I first began to question the safety of the church, which I had always thought of as a place of refuge from evil. My friends and I spent a lot of time at the churchyard, as it was in the center of the village and a popular spot for meeting up. We'd often sit on the large stone wall surrounding the church, or wander into the graveyard to explore the old tombstones. We were fascinated by them, even if it sounds a bit morbid. Growing up in the countryside, you made your own fun. There was one part of the graveyard that always made me feel uneasy. It was said to be the burial place of witches, and some of the gravestones had their plinths removed, revealing a thick layer of seashells. The story was that the shells were placed there to trap evil spirits. I never really looked into it, but as an adult, I'm more skeptical of the whole tale. One summer day, my friend and I were sitting in this part of the graveyard, taking a break with a cold drink. We were looking at the old gravestones, and I found myself imagining what it would have been like to be one of those people. As we sat there, the air suddenly grew cold. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a white mist. I stayed very still, and so did my friend. I gently touched her arm and whispered, "Shush," without looking up. The mist drifted across the gravestone in front of us. It happened quickly, and when it was gone, the temperature returned to normal. My friend had felt the cold too, but only saw the mist for a moment. We weren't scared, just confused. As the years went by, many of us saw the white mists, but they only appeared at night. That's when most strange things happened, including the black shadows. One evening, my brother's friends and I were sitting on the wall when one of them noticed movement in the graveyard. We all looked up and saw several human-shaped black shadows moving. One of them seemed to grow larger, spinning like a vortex as it moved across the graveyard. It picked up speed and headed toward the church gate. When it reached the gate, it flew open with a loud bang and slammed shut. We were all too stunned to move at first, but when the gate snapped shut, we didn't hesitate to run. I was also in the church choir, and rang the bells as a teenager. The tower was always the creepiest part of the church. It was dark, and the stone spiral stairs had a musty smell. The first time I went up with other bell ringers was fine, but the second time, I went alone. When I entered the stairway, I immediately felt a blast of cold air, even though it hadn't been there the first time. As I climbed, I felt a hand gently touch my back, as if someone was guiding me forward. I looked behind, expecting to see someone, but there was no one there. I hurried up the rest of the stairs, and when I reached the bell tower, I heard footsteps following me. I waited, but no one appeared. A few minutes later, 2 more people arrived, and when I asked if anyone had gone back down, they told me no one else had been in the church. After that, I always waited outside for the others to arrive. At the time, these experiences really frightened me. The last one, with the black vortex, was especially unsettling. But as I grew older, I began to think about it differently. Maybe the first and third experiences were just my imagination, and the second could have been a case of mass hysteria. Still, I couldn't completely shake the feeling that something strange was going on. As a child, I'd heard the rumors about the church, about the graves holding evil spirits, the missing gargoyles letting evil in, and the blocked-up north door that supposedly kept evil spirits from escaping during christenings. In 1964, I was 5 years old and soon to be placed in a children's home. At the time, I shared a back bedroom at 125 Abercane Road, Streatham, with my grandfather. His bed was in the center of the room, while mine was against the outside wall, allowing me to see the sky through the gap between the curtain and the window. It was dusk, and the sky was a deep blue, turning darker as night approached. There was not a cloud in sight, except for a tiny, round one far in the distance. I noticed that the cloud was coming directly towards me, growing larger as it moved closer. Behind it, there were more small round clouds in a line, all heading in the same direction. As they neared, I could see that the clouds weren't just clouds. They were being ridden by tiny men, no taller than about 14 inches. They had black hair, full black beards, and wore pointed conical helmets. In their left hands, they carried round shields, and in their right hands, they each held a trident. By the time the first cloud reached the top of my window, it had become clear that one of the tiny riders was trying to push through the gap in the window, as if trying to enter the room. That was enough for me. I scrambled into my bed and made sure my grandfather was between me and the window. Beside me, against the inner wall of the room, stood a wardrobe. But now, the wardrobe was draped in patterned fabric, and the 4 little riders were stationed at the top corners, standing at attention, guarding it like soldiers behind the curtained pelmets. Suddenly, the wardrobe door opened, and out stepped a fairy, about 3 feet tall, with long straight black hair and pale white skin. She wore a garment that seemed to glow with pure white light, and she stared at me with an expressionless face. But that wasn't the strangest part. As if this wasn't already enough to frighten a 5-year-old, something even more bizarre happened. In the far corner of the room, I saw what I can only describe as a cobweb of energy. This web-like structure appeared in the corner where the walls met the ceiling, glowing with circular bands of multicolored light. It didn't emit light, but it was visible in the dark. To me, it looked like a special effect you might see in a science fiction show like Star Trek. But this was years before Star Trek was even filmed. The fairy, along with her small guard, disappeared into this energy web. I watched in awe as the cobweb of energy remained in the corner. It stayed there, day and night, for 2 whole weeks. When I woke up in the morning, it was still there. When I returned from school, it was still there. It didn't go away. One day, I pointed to the empty space in the corner and asked my mother, "What's that?" She couldn't see anything and dismissed it, saying that when she had been ill with pneumonia, she had seen strange things too. But I wasn't sick. I was fine, just a regular child returning home from a normal day at school. For 2 weeks that cobweb of energy remained in the room. My mother never saw it, but I remember her brushing it off, not even trying to consider that I was seeing something real. She dismissed it as the kind of thing that children imagine, without thinking twice. As an adult, I've spent years trying to understand what I saw. I've read many books about the supernatural, including accounts of people encountering the Fae in their natural habitats. But I've never come across anything that describes the Fae traveling specifically to visit a human. And I often wonder, why me? Why was I the one who had such an encounter? The fairy I saw was accompanied by guards, which suggests she wasn't just any fairy. Some have suggested that the Fae take children, especially those who are unwanted or unchristened, and replace them with changelings, dead spirits disguised as children. I couldn't help but think that the fairy I saw was somehow important, and perhaps her guards were there to protect me. Could the cobweb of energy have been a more benevolent force, sent to protect me from the Fae's darker intentions? I've read that beings like angels avoid manifesting in human form because they fear being worshipped, which is meant for God alone. Perhaps this energy web was an angelic presence, quietly watching over me, guarding me against something far more sinister. A few months ago, I came across YGS and was immediately captivated by the paranormal stories others have shared. I've always had an interest in the supernatural, especially considering I come from a county in England rich with ghost stories and paranormal activity. Today, I want to share an experience that happened about 15 years ago, one that I still think about often. My parents took me and my younger brother on a long weekend trip to Edinburgh, Scotland, and during our stay, we were looking for something interesting to do. That's when my dad found a leaflet about a place called Mary King's Close, a street hidden beneath the buildings in Edinburgh's Old Town. The street was partially demolished and buried under newer buildings, preserving it almost perfectly. It's one of those places with a strong reputation for hauntings, investigated by ghost hunters and mediums on TV, and there are plenty of pictures of it online. If you ever visit Edinburgh, it's definitely worth checking out. On the tour, we were led into a room known to be haunted by the spirit of a child, often referred to as Annie's room. In one corner of the room was a large pile of toys that visitors had left for the child's spirit to play with, but the rest of the room was stripped back, revealing wooden beams and old plasterwork. While standing still in the middle of the room, I turned my head to take in the surroundings. For a brief moment, something passed by my face. I can't fully explain it, but it was like a solid mist, about 3 to 4 feet off the ground, around my eye level, and roughly 2 feet long. It reminded me of the shape of a person standing in profile, but there were no distinct features. It didn't feel like a shadow or a reflection, it felt solid in a way that was hard to explain. I didn't say anything at the time, but later, when the tour was over, I told my dad about what I'd seen. I've worn glasses for most of my life, so my dad's immediate explanation was that it was probably just a reflection from the ceiling light off my lenses. I didn't think much of it, but then things got strange. About 10 minutes after I told my dad, my younger brother came out of the gift shop with my mom. The first thing he said to me was that he had seen something white pass by his face in the same room, and his description of it was exactly the same as mine. What's even stranger is that my brother doesn't wear glasses, so there's no way he could have had the same explanation. He also had no way of hearing my story before he shared his own. Neither of us had talked about it beforehand. At the time, our parents just brushed it off, telling us to stop being silly, and we never spoke about it again. I haven't talked to my brother about it since, and I'm not sure if he even remembers. But to this day, I can't shake the feeling that what we both saw was something real, not just a trick of the light or some random effect. There was a definite presence to it. Something about it felt like it wasn't just a visual anomaly. I've often tried to come up with logical explanations. Maybe it was a reflection, some trick of the mind, or something to do with the weather, but nothing really fits. What I felt in that moment still lingers with me, and I trust that feeling more than any rational explanation. Whatever it was, it definitely wasn't just a trick of the light. This incident happened just a week ago, and although I was initially shocked, I would really appreciate hearing other people's thoughts on it. To give some context, I don't sleep well at night for a few reasons. My youngest son, who has autism and ADHD among other challenges, has an irregular sleep pattern and sometimes wanders at night. Because of this, I always try to sleep with one ear open. On top of that, I have carpal tunnel syndrome in both hands, and I'm awaiting surgery to fix it. The pain makes it difficult to sleep, so I usually drift off around 4 a.m. and get maybe 2 hours of sleep before my alarm goes off at 6 a.m. My youngest son has this habit of knocking on my bedroom door before he enters. It's always the same: knock, knock, knock. Mommy, knock, knock, knock. Mommy, knock, knock, knock. Mommy! It's very much like Sheldon Cooper's ritual from The Big Bang Theory, and it'll make sense why I mentioned this later. So, a week ago, I was lying in bed reading, and it was getting close to 3:50 a.m. I started to feel drowsy, so I turned over and finally started to drift off. I was woken up at 4:20 a.m. by the sound of knock, knock, knock on my bedroom door. I waited for the rest of the ritual, expecting my son to follow with his usual, "Mommy," but it never came. I called his name, no answer. So, I got out of bed and opened the door, thinking he might have gotten up in the night. But there was no one there. I assumed he must have gone back to bed, so I checked on him. I found him sound asleep, snuggled up with his rhubarb and custard toys. My oldest son was snoring away in his room, so I knew neither of them had been up. I started to think maybe I was just tired and imagining things. I got back in bed, debating whether it was even worth trying to sleep at this point. Just as I was getting comfortable, knock, 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 the same sound came again. Now, I was a bit annoyed and exhausted at this point. I jumped out of bed and yanked the door open, only to find an empty hallway. I'm usually a skeptic, but in that moment I muttered, "Stop it! I'm tired and cranky, this is not the time." I closed the door, got back into bed, and decided to try to read my book instead of sleep. A few minutes later, I heard my oldest son wake up, cough, and then rush to the bathroom. I followed quickly and found him being violently sick. I jumped out of bed to help him, and after a few minutes, he came out, still feeling awful, and said he was going back to bed. I gathered up a bucket, some water, face wipes, and a towel, making sure he was comfortable. As I was settling him in, he apologized and said, "Sorry, Ma, I didn't mean to wake you. I know you're having trouble sleeping." I reassured him. "Don't worry, it's fine. I was awake." As I went back to my room and sat on the bed, I found myself speaking to whoever, or whatever, had caused the knocking. I said, "Whoever that was, I'm sorry, and thank you." In that moment, I truly felt that someone, or something, had kept me awake so I could be there for my son. If I had fallen asleep like I usually do, I might not have heard him being sick and wouldn't have been able to help. It turned out he had a virus and ended up being in bed for 3 days. I'm still not sure what to make of it, but in that moment, I felt as if some kind of protective force had been watching over me. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. When I was a child, my mother often took me to a jazz cafe, where I became enchanted by the band that played there. Among them, I was particularly drawn to the female singer, who I lovingly called Miss Bessie. Every time my mother and I would leave the cafe, she would blow me a kiss. I looked forward to this little ritual, and as time went on, I noticed that the other band members seemed to grow older, their hair going gray. But Miss Bessie, she never seemed to age. She always looked the same. One day, as I was getting curious about the band, I asked my mother why the musicians were getting older but Miss Bessie didn't seem to change. Yeah, the jazz band has been here since we first came to this cafe, right?" she replied, brushing it off. "Of course people get older, silly. Look at me, I was young once too." But I wasn't talking about her. I stood in front of the fridge, watching my mom prepare supper, and said, "No, Mom! Look at Miss Bessie. She never gets older." My mom laughed, thinking I was just infatuated with the singer. "Do you want a guitar or something, like the guitar player?" she asked, knowing I had been begging for a guitar. "No, it's not the guitar player, it's Miss Bessie, the singer," I insisted, but she just chuckled and continued with her chores. The next day, when we went to the cafe as usual, my mother grinned at me as if I were going on my first date. When we entered, I looked up at the stage, eager to see Miss Bessie. Usually, she'd wave at me and blow me a kiss, just like always. But today, when I asked, "Where's Miss Bessie?" my mother pretended not to know. "Who's that? You mean the singer? She's not here," she said, looking confused. Confused, I pointed at the stage. "She's right there. The woman singing." But my mother shook her head, seemingly dismissing me, and said, "Are you sure? Why don't you stop lying? I don't see anyone." At that moment, a voice began singing, her voice. I was certain of it. "It's her! It's Miss Bessie!" I cried, but my mom just waved it off, saying, "We'll see about that when we're done." As we sat there, something strange happened. I felt a gust of wind and caught a familiar scent, her perfume. The backstage cover blew, revealing an old tape recorder with the play button pressed. My mom, still annoyed, stood up to leave, and I quickly followed, still baffled. "Why are we leaving, Mom? I saw her. She was there, singing. It's not a lie, it's her," I told her, feeling frustrated and a little scared. We approached the cashier, and my mother, now exasperated, asked, "Do you know who sings for the band? My son wants to know." The cashier looked at us, surprised, and replied, "Oh, the singer? She hasn't come back since the war." The man then shared the history of the cafe with us. It used to be a pub, and before the band played, there was a female singer who performed alongside a pianist. The pianist went off to fight in the war and never returned. The singer, heartbroken, passed away from grief. The owner of the pub later discovered old recordings of her voice, songs she had sung, likely recorded for the pianist's practice. He'd been trying to recreate her performances ever since. The current band, unable to replace her, had been covering her songs with no singer. The songs were rearranged by the band members, and though there were only a few songs that had originally been sung by the singer, they had continued to play and rearrange her music, breathing new life into it. After hearing all of this, I understood that Miss Bessie was not just a memory, but a part of the cafe's history. She might have been gone, but her spirit lived on in her songs, sung every night by the band. But after that night, I never saw her again, not in person anyway. The stage was no longer there, and my mother continued to laugh at me, calling it just an old recording. She'd always say, "You were imagining things. It was just a tape, nothing more." But to this day, I feel the presence of Miss Bessie. I can't help but wonder if I had a brief, spiritual connection with her, a way of communicating with her through the music, or perhaps she wanted to share the story of the cafe with me. Was it all in my mind, or did I somehow reach out to her spirit? I may never know for sure, but I'll always be grateful for the songs she shared, whether through a ghostly presence or an old, worn tape. When I was very young, I was the only person in my family with religious beliefs. I was Christian, and while my family often teased me about it, I grew up with a mix of spirituality and curiosity, which eventually led me to more Buddhist beliefs as I got older. I still consider myself spiritual, but my interest in science has shaped how I view things now. I'm open to various opinions and theories, and I would love to hear others' perspectives on my experiences. It all started when I was young. After a few years, I moved from the cot in my parents' room to my own bedroom in the new part of the house. This is when I began experiencing unsettling dreams and a sense of unease that persisted throughout my childhood. I was given a doll at birth, which sat on the window ledge above my bed, and I always found her unsettling. She seemed to move, her smile growing wider, and I even heard faint giggles, probably the overactive imagination of a young child scared of the dark, but it still made me feel uneasy. Along with the new bedroom, the house also had a second bathroom in the extension. The downstairs bathroom, located in the new part of the house, became the site of some of my more terrifying experiences. I was always too scared to use it, preferring to wait for my mom to finish her bath upstairs rather than face the downstairs bathroom. Even now, I still feel uncomfortable with it, often choosing the upstairs bathroom instead. As I grew older, I tried to shrug off these feelings, but they still lingered. When my brother moved out, I moved into his old room on the original side of the house, and surprisingly, my nightmares stopped almost entirely after that. It was as if something about that side of the house was different for me, and it gave me some peace. Now, to recount the experiences that stand out most, in chronological order. Childhood experiences. The first clear experience I remember, aside from the doll's unsettling presence, was feeling paranoid that I was being watched. Whether it was from the window, my wardrobe, or even other toys in my room, I always felt a sense of being observed. At the age of 5 or 6, I would prefer to get dressed in the bathroom after a bath rather than being alone in my room. It's strange to think that a child so young would feel this way, especially since I had no history of abuse or trauma. When I was 7, my parents split up. There were no arguments, it was mutual, and I moved with my mum to a house not far from our original home. I remember being okay there, sleeping well with no strange occurrences. Suffolk and the Robert dream. When I was 9, my mum and I moved to Suffolk. It was a large, old country house with a big garden right next to a farm. My new bedroom had a cupboard with a boiler inside, and although the house was old, the sounds I heard, creaks and groans from the boiler, could be easily explained. However, I began having vivid dreams about a man. He wasn't particularly evil or malicious, but he frightened me. I knew his name was Robert, or Rob, and he often complained about back pains and cramps in his hands. His dirty fingernails stretched past the tips of his fingers, and he would mumble to himself, sometimes as though talking to a pet. These dreams led to restless nights, bedwetting, and once a nosebleed, though I can't say for certain whether it was a coincidence. I began to feel paranoid again. I kept my curtains closed at night, turned my TV around so it wasn't facing my bed, and even turned my mirror so it wouldn't watch me while I slept. Auntie's house and the man in the garden. We eventually moved back to my original town to be closer to family, and while we were looking for a new home, we stayed with my auntie in her old bungalow, which was built on farmland. My mum, aunt, and I all had strange experiences in that house, none of them particularly malicious but still unsettling. Once, my mum woke up abruptly at 7 a.m. to a firm push on her shoulder, even though she had not set an alarm. She thought it was either me or my aunt, but we were both still asleep. My aunt also saw a man in the kitchen and outside in the garden on separate occasions, walking casually as if he belonged there. I too saw a man at the end of the garden, kneeling by the oak and conifer trees. We both agreed that if we had been out, we would have assumed he was a normal person, but in the house, it felt like he couldn't have been alive. Later homes and unsettling paintings. After staying with my aunt, we moved into a small flat where nothing really strange happened except for a painting my mum bought at an auction. The painting depicted a woman at a piano, and it always made me feel uneasy, though I couldn't explain why. The current house and the most recent events. I'm now 18 and mostly living in the house I was born in. My dad spends most of his time at work, or at his fiancée's house, and I enjoy the responsibility of being alone. But that doesn't mean I'm not still spooked from time to time. The downstairs bathroom, still in the newer part of the house, has been the location of some of my most frightening experiences. Often when I'm in the shower or on the toilet, the door has opened or closed by itself, which might not sound terrifying at first, but when you're alone and there's no draft, it's unsettling. I've also seen small handprints appear on the bathroom mirror, which couldn't have been caused by me, since I'm the only one with hands small enough to make them, but I've never touched the mirror in such a way. More recently, I've had moments where I thought I was being burgled. I heard noises downstairs, like doors opening and things being moved, but when I checked, nothing had been touched. The house is detached, and there's no way it could have been from next door. One time, I heard the downstairs bathroom open when I wasn't in there, and I was the only one home. After my granddad passed away, I adopted his 2 cats, Benedict and Rami. At first, the cats were very attached to him, and they moped around the house. But as they became more comfortable, Rami, who is extremely shy and mute, started talking a bit more, and I would meow back at him. It seemed to make him happy. One evening, when I was home alone, the hall door opened, and Rami ran downstairs, meowing at the top of his lungs. He ran through the door and returned a few moments later, still meowing. Ben, who is mute, came downstairs and sat on the sofa, staring at the spot next to me, as if someone were sitting there. After a few minutes, Ben went into another room, and Rami went to the same spot on the other sofa, still meowing. I responded as usual, and Rami followed me into the kitchen, where I heard a loud meow sound, but it wasn't him. I was watching him closely, and he's mute, so it couldn't have been him. I theorize it could have been my granddad, coming to check on the cats. but I'll never know for sure. When I was about 10, my family and I moved into a new house, number 11, in Brentwood, UK. We lived there for a long time, and I always thought it was the nicest town I'd ever known. But the house, well, it had a strange presence. It was around 150 years old, and from the moment we moved in, we could feel that it was already occupied by something else. It wasn't just us living there was definitely something else. My family and I had all sorts of strange experiences. Most of them were about sensing things or feeling something was off. For example, my mom and another family member who stayed with us from time to time would both say they felt like someone or something was sitting on them when they tried to sleep. At first, it started with something on their feet, but over time, it felt like something was sitting on their chest. Neither of them had sleep disorders or mental health issues that would explain this. There was always a negative feeling in the house, though it wasn't bad enough to make us leave or anything. It just made things a bit uncomfortable at times. Personally, I had one major issue. I hated walking up the stairs alone. The hallway at the top always felt dark and heavy, like someone was standing there, watching me. I couldn't see anyone, but I always felt like there was a presence, and it felt male. It was the same feeling for others who spent time in the house. My younger sister often complained that someone would knock on the bathroom door while she was in there. She would tell it to stop, and after a while it did. During the day, I used to catch glimpses of someone sitting on the stairs. It was a man in a white suit with brown hair, smiling. He never spoke or did anything else, just sat there. I also saw a different man, sitting in the exact same spot on other days, but this time in a black suit. It struck me as strange. Was it the same man in different clothes? I always thought that spirits or ghosts wore what they wore when they died, so it didn't make sense that the man could change his outfit. My brother's room was next to mine and my younger sister's. He's about a year and a bit older than me. Every night, he would see a tall man standing in his room, just watching him. He described the man as being angry, with long hair and a face that was badly cut and bleeding. Sometimes the man would get closer to the bed. One day, I had some school friends over while my mom went out shopping. It was a bright day, so we were hanging out in the garden. My best friend had always felt uneasy in the house, though she never had any experiences, but she didn't like the feeling, like someone was watching her. While we were outside, one of my friends suddenly looked up, shocked, and we all turned to see what she was looking at. Standing at the window was the face of an old man. I remember that he had white hair and was frowning. His skin was very pale, almost as white as his hair. Later, my mum learned from a neighbor that an old man had lived in the house and passed away there, so that made sense to me. We also had a cat spirit. It was a little black cat, and it wasn't scary at all. Sometimes we would hear it purring or feel it brushing against our legs, especially in the kitchen. It would appear quickly, just a glimpse out of the corner of your eye. One day, my mum's friend was over, and we were sitting in the living room when she suddenly said, "I didn't know you got a new cat." We told her we didn't, and she looked toward the door and said, "But I just saw it run out of the room." No one had mentioned anything about the cat spirit to her before. The most terrifying experience I had in that house was when I was bunking school. I decided to make the small cupboard under the stairs my den. I skipped school, knowing my mum would be out shopping. I snuck back into the house through the back door, making sure my siblings were at school. I was completely alone in the house. After some time, I went into my little den to hide. The cupboard was small, just big enough to sit in, and it had one of those ball latches on the door, so I always felt safe inside because I could get out easily if needed. After a while, I decided to leave the cupboard and use the bathroom. When I pushed the door open, it slammed back into me, forcing me back inside. I immediately knew something was wrong. The door wouldn't have slammed shut like that unless something was holding it closed from the other side. I tried again, but it wouldn't budge. I could feel something on the other side, pushing against it. I was in a panic, throwing myself at the door, trying to get out. Finally, after what felt like forever, the pressure vanished, and I stumbled out into the hallway, shaking and terrified. There was nothing blocking the door. The house was empty, and everything was normal again. I didn't tell my mum what happened, but I was so shaken that she could tell something was wrong. She helped calm me down, but I never went back into that cupboard again. I've been sensitive to spirits since I was about 12 years old. At first, it was just little things like flashes of color or a shadow that seemed to vanish quickly. I thought I was imagining things, so I didn't tell anyone. My parents were strict and religious, and I was afraid they'd send me to a psychiatrist if I said anything about it. Over time, the experiences grew stronger. I began to see things more clearly, like an elderly lady waiting at the tube station. I saw her several times on the way to the market with my mum on Saturdays. There was also an old couple sitting on a park bench near my school. I saw them every day after school, except for Wednesdays, for some reason. There was also a dog that would follow his still living owner. The man would walk past our house every day to the shop at the end of the street, and his little dog would walk beside him, wagging its tail, happy as could be. It was strange to see these things so clearly, but at first, I didn't think of them as ghosts. They seemed so real, like they blended in perfectly with everything around them. But then, I started seeing people who looked out of place, people wearing clothes that seemed outdated, like from the past. That's when I realized they must be spirits. No one else noticed them, and that's when I truly understood I was seeing ghosts. I wasn't able to communicate with spirits until I was 15. That's when I had a serious car accident that changed everything. I was in a van owned by my friend Lauren's dad, Graham. He was driving us home after a concert at a theater in the West End of London. It was just after 11 p.m. on a Friday night. I don't remember much of the details due to my injuries, but I'll tell you what I do remember. We were about 10 minutes from home, stopped at a red light, when a large truck tried to cut the corner and crashed into our van. The truck was speeding, and the back end hit the van's driver's side before spinning and stopping. Our van rolled over, and my seatbelt broke. I was thrown into the back of the van. The crash left me with serious injuries, including a fractured skull, back, shoulder, wrist, and both legs. I went into a coma for over a month. While I was in a coma, the doctors told my family that I died 4 times, twice in the operating room, once in recovery, and once due to a reaction to the medication. When I woke up, I was able to see the auras of the people around me. I could see the colors around doctors and family members, like blue or green for calmness and yellow or red when they were worried. My parents' auras were dark red or purple from all the stress. After I woke up and went through rehab, I noticed that I could now communicate with spirits. The hospital and rehab facility I was at were full of spirits, mostly older people, but also a few children and younger adults. The worst one I saw was a man in his 30s with a head injury. His head was split open, and you could see parts of his brain. He wandered around, crying out for someone named Shell or Michelle. It was heartbreaking to witness, but I didn't try to talk to him. I now wish I had. I also saw a little girl, around 6 or 7, holding a doll, looking for someone, probably a parent. There was an elderly woman who sat by the nurse's station, rocking back and forth, calling for the nurses, but they never paid attention. She looked like she'd been there a long time, and her clothes were from the 1970s. One night, I saw something that really stuck with me. A woman named Marianne, who was recovering from a stroke, was in the bed across from mine. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I saw a man in his late 50s standing at the end of her bed. He was talking to her, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. I was about to call for a nurse when the man looked at me and said, "It's okay. She's coming for a walk with me." He spoke to me in my head, not out loud. He told me not to worry, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The man helped Marianne get up and dressed, guiding her gently. He led her to the door, and as they left, he turned to me and smiled, saying, "You're okay now. You'll be with your family soon." I felt completely relaxed and went back to sleep. The next morning, The nurses were in a panic. I overheard them talking about Marianne, saying how she had passed away from a stroke around 2 a.m., the same time I saw her leave with the man. I realized then that the man who helped her wasn't just a visitor. He was probably an angel, taking her home. After my recovery, my family moved to a new house in a more accessible area. It had been built in the 1920s and had a few spirits, but I got along well with them. One spirit, a former owner, was a published writer and artist. He encouraged my art, which meant a lot to me. That's how it all began. I've been seeing spirits for over 30 years now. I've read and studied as much as I can on the subject. I can even read people's auras and help them through tarot readings and crystal cleansing. I found these abilities by accident, but they've helped me a lot in life. My family, even my strict Jewish parents, now support me in what I do. I've always used my gifts to help others and never charge for it because I believe it's wrong to profit from it. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, my family lived in a flat above a pub that my dad owned. The place was huge, with 2 floors. Downstairs were my parents' bedroom, the living room, the cash office cupboard, my dad's office, and the bathroom. My brothers and my bedrooms were upstairs. We found out later that the building used to be an old bed and breakfast, and there were actually more rooms behind mine and my brother's room, plus one above the flat door with a rocking chair, which really freaked out my parents. I only recently learned just how many strange things happened while we lived there. One of the first things that would happen was things would go missing. My mom, who was very aware that there was something in the flat, would complain about losing her keys. She would search for them, sometimes for an hour, and then come back into the room to find them sitting exactly where she had looked before. She also mentioned hearing footsteps running upstairs when my brother and I were at school or at my grandparents' house. There was one time when my mom was putting my washing away in my room, which she said was a horrible room to be in, when she felt something tugging on her cardigan. She thought it was me calling her, saying, "Ma'am, ma'am, ma'am." But when she answered, there was no reply, and she heard running away. It wasn't until later that she remembered that both me and my brother were at my grandparents' for dinner at the time. Another time, she was talking to one of the barmen from the pub in the cash office, with her back to the living room. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the living room. The big painting that hung above the couch had fallen across the room, landing in front of the TV. My mum said that pictures usually fall downwards, but this had crossed the room completely. One of the most shocking experiences came from my parents' best friends, who stayed at the flat one night, while my brother and I stayed at my grandparents'. They stayed in my brother's room, which had an odd L shape with the bed against the far wall behind the door. In the middle of the night, they heard strange scratching noises. The next morning, my mum went to put washing in my brother's room and couldn't get in. When she finally managed to open the door, she found that the bed had been pushed right up against the door, blocking it. She called V, her friend, immediately, demanding to know what she'd done. V started crying, saying it was horrible staying in there, and she hadn't touched the bed at all. V didn't know how the bed could have been moved because she didn't even close the door after entering. Our dog also started barking at the same corner every night. My little brother even started pointing at that corner and saying, "Bad man," asking my mum to tell the bad man to go away. The final experience really shocked me. My dad doesn't believe in ghosts or the paranormal, but he refused to talk about what happened in that flat. One evening, he came upstairs from work to take a shower. While in the bathroom, he heard knocking on the bathroom door and a woman's voice saying, "Hello, hello, hello." He thought it was my mum, who must have come back for something she forgot. But when my mum came home later, he asked her what she had forgotten, and she was completely confused. She had been at my grandparents' all day and hadn't come back. My dad turned pale when he realized something was wrong. Honestly, I don't remember much of these events since I was so young, but my mum swears there was something in that flat. She never felt threatened, but she definitely felt like something was there. Oh, and one last thing, my mum's friend, who lived across the road, once asked her why she hadn't waved back at her one night. My mum was confused and asked her what she meant. Apparently, her friend had woken up in the middle of the night and thought she saw my mum holding my little brother in the window. She waved, but the figure just stared back. My mum was pretty freaked out by that one. The first ghost I can ever remember seeing was when I was about 6 years old. I had a mirror that my mum made for me. I used to lie in bed at night, staring at it, feeling uneasy because she had decorated it with beads, and there was one black bead that always caught my attention. I thought it looked like an eye watching me. One night, while I was staring at it, I felt a sudden unease, and right next to the bead in the mirror, an old man's face appeared. I don't remember much about his appearance, but I do remember that I screamed when I saw him. As I screamed, he started laughing, but no sound came out. The strange part was that around his mouth, there were sparkly rainbow colors flashing, something I've never seen before. It was unlike anything I could explain. My mum and dad were in the bathroom next to my room, getting ready for bed. My mum rushed in when she heard me screaming, and I tried to explain that there was an old man in my mirror. She comforted me, but when she turned to look at the mirror, the man vanished instantly. He stayed there until she turned to face the mirror. I was only 6, so I didn't recall many details about him, but the only way I could describe him was like the KFC Colonel, without the glasses. My mum saw him several times after that, and she always described him the same way, like the KFC Colonel. His face was solid white, like someone had painted it with face paint. It wasn't see-through, but every line and wrinkle on his face had gray or black detail, almost like he had been sketched with pencil. He was very chubby, and I never saw his shoulders or neck, just his face. My mum and my sister-in-law both saw him too, and they saw his whole body. He started appearing at my mum's bedroom doorway every night, especially around 3 a.m. My mum used to speak to him, and she said that he was mischievous, not malevolent. She also noticed that the rainbow colors were around his whole face, while I only saw them around his mouth and wrinkles. One strange thing my mum mentioned was that he didn't like my dad. Apparently, when my dad was around, the man would appear as a solid black figure, and my dad would have nightmares about the devil. For someone like my dad, who had been in the army, admitting things like that wasn't easy. My mum once told me that she saw him rush towards her in bed, laughing the same way he did when he appeared to me. She was scared and screamed, covering her eyes. She thought his laugh was mischievous, not harmful. There were other odd things that happened in the house too, like the TV turning on and off by itself, or changing channels on its own. One time, the door to the box bedroom upstairs suddenly flew wide open. My mum and brother were downstairs having dinner, and when they went to check, the door was shut, but it flew open again. I also remember saying that I saw a little boy crying in my room, in the corner, and a lady in a red jumper running up the stairs, looking worried. I don't recall much about this, but I always had the feeling of being watched there. My mum, trying to understand what was happening, visited some spiritualist ministers, something she didn't usually do. They told her that the woman I saw was the ghost of the ill wife of the man, named Albert, who used to live in the house. The man was Albert, and he used to occupy my room. His wife had been ill and stayed in my mum's room. The minister said that when Albert appeared in my mum's room at night, he was probably reenacting how he used to watch over his sick wife. The little ghost boy I saw was probably their son. They also mentioned a ghost cat, but no one ever saw it, not even me. The ministers explained that the rainbow colors around Albert's face meant he was friendly and calm. My mum became so used to seeing Albert that when we moved, she told the ministers she didn't mind if he came with us. But Albert refused, saying he wanted to stay and continue watching over his home. Now that I'm 25 and married, I still have strange things happen that I'd like to share. My husband and I lived in a flat in Ardrossan, Scotland, for a while. After 2 years, we moved to a semi-detached house in the same area because of bad neighbors. When we first viewed the new house, I didn't feel anything strange or paranormal. I liked it because the neighbors were friendly and we knew them, which was all that mattered to us at the time. When we spent our first night at number 58, I had a dream so vivid that I wasn't sure if it was just a dream or if I had been sleepwalking. In the dream, a man I had never seen before, about 50 or 55 years old, beckoned me out of bed, as if telling me to follow him. I did. I followed him into the spare room next to our room. Even though I didn't know the house well, I felt very aware of my surroundings. The man, who was blurry in the dark and whose face I couldn't make out, pointed at the boiler cupboard with one arm. The next morning, I told my husband about this strange dream. I had a feeling that I had actually gotten out of bed, but I didn't say that to him because I wasn't completely sure. It didn't feel like a normal dream. After a while, we both forgot about it. Over the months, I started feeling like I was being watched a lot. In the morning, when I would pass the back room doorway on my way to the bathroom, I would feel a presence there. Even now, I still get that feeling. About a year into living in the house, we started having issues with the heating system. We had a lot of gas engineers come out, and the problem seemed to be the age of the boiler. At one point, the carbon monoxide alarm went off, and there were strange noises coming from the boiler. Sometimes it wouldn't even turn on. One of the gas engineers said it was dangerous, and needed to be replaced as soon as possible. I was shocked and kept pushing the letting agency to do something about it. Getting the boiler replaced turned out to be a huge hassle. The letting agency was very reluctant to help. We ended up going a week without hot water or heating, and they barely did anything to fix it. The longer it went on, the more active the house seemed to become. Things started going missing. Objects would turn up in different places, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. It got so bad that I would almost run past the back room doorway in the morning to use the bathroom. One night, while I was making dinner, my husband was due home from work in about 15 minutes. I was chopping vegetables at the breakfast bar when I saw a figure of a man at the kitchen door out of the corner of my eye. It startled me so much that my heart seemed to stop for a few seconds. It happened so quickly that I immediately thought my husband had come home early, but as soon as I turned to look, he was gone. My heart was racing, and I was shaking. I wasn't expecting anyone, not even my husband or a family member, and this figure made my legs go weak. I had this gut feeling that whoever it was wanted my attention, and they definitely got it that day. Our neighbors next door are very friendly, and they told us that many people had lived in number 58. They remembered an older man who had lived here and passed away several years ago. When the boiler was finally replaced, I felt a sense of relief in the house. Although I still sense the same presence, it's not as strong or obvious anymore. My cats occasionally stare at something across the room with their eyes, and they've followed something upstairs a few times. I believe the man I call the doorway man might have just been trying to warn us about the potential danger from the faulty boiler. I'm okay with sharing my house with this entity. I feel like he's not here to harm us, and I'm happy to coexist with him. I was 6 years old when this happened. It was a Wednesday morning, and I had school that day. For some reason, I woke up at 5 a.m. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then, about a minute later, I heard something that still scares me to this day. I heard a girl's voice. She sounded young, and it seemed to be coming from the bottom of the stairs. My room was the closest to the stairs, which made everything even worse. The girl was calling my dog's name for some reason. This is where it gets terrifying. You know how, in horror films, the villain calls a person's name 3 times in a creepy voice? Well, it sounded exactly like that. She called out, "Tyler. Slight pause, Tyler. Slight pause, Tyler." She was saying my dog's name in a long, drawn-out way, like, "Tyler Lear." As she said it, her voice got louder and louder, and I immediately thought she was coming up the stairs. I was too scared to get up and run to my parents' room, just in case I saw her. Instead, I hid under the covers and started crying. I cried myself to sleep, and a few hours later, my mom woke me up for school. That day, I told my friends at school about what happened, but they all looked at me like I was crazy. When my mom picked me up from school, I told her about the morning, and she was just as scared as I was. Unfortunately, more strange things happened after that. Things would get thrown around, and then my mom had a weird experience too. I'll share those stories later. Thankfully, we moved out of that house shortly after the incident with the girl, and now I'm living in Ireland. But now, strange things are happening here too. It's not as extreme as before, nothing is being thrown, but about a month ago, I heard the girl's voice again, only this time, she was calling my name. I was lying in bed, almost asleep after a long day at school. You might think I was just tired, but that's not the case. As I was lying down, I suddenly heard a whisper say my name. At first, I thought it was my mom checking if I was awake. But when I sat up and looked around, there was no one there. It sounded so real, and now I've started seeing dark shadows at the bottom of the stairs. They look like a young girl. I told my parents about it, and they said they've seen the same thing too, so at least I'm not going crazy. There's one more thing I need to mention. When I said I woke up at 5 a.m. in the beginning of this story, I realized something just recently. For the past week, I've been waking up at 5 a.m. again. As I was writing this, I suddenly realized it could be connected to the incident in London. I woke up at 5 a.m. back then too. When I figured that out, I said, "Oh my God!" out loud and started to cry. It all made sense now. I went to my mum's room to talk to her about what happened in London, and how all these strange things seemed to be happening here. She pointed out that the experience with the girl in London happened around the same time of year as this is happening now. Maybe she's coming back to check on us. Since I've been waking up at 5 a.m., I've started seeing the girl at the bottom of the stairs again, walking into the hallway and toward the kitchen door. I've only seen her twice. The first time, she was just a dark shadow moving quickly across the hallway. The second time, she was clearer. The downstairs light was off, so it was dark, but the bathroom light was on, so I could see enough. When I saw her the second time, she was going around the banister. She had black hair and was dressed in black. Then, she just disappeared into the hallway. I'm not sure if what happened to me was a dream or a real experience. All I know is that it happened one night when my husband and I were visiting our friend's house in Wales. Their new home is a beautiful old Victorian house with 3 stories. As you walk in, there's a hallway with the kitchen on the left, followed by stairs. To the right is the sitting room, and there's a room they use for storage. The stairs have a little turn in them, so when you reach the top, you're facing the front of the house. To your left is their daughter's room and their bedroom. Ahead is a spare room, and to the right are their son's room and the bathroom. Their daughter's room was once a small box room, and it has a staircase that leads up to a loft conversion, which is now her main bedroom, and where we were staying. Our friends decided to sleep downstairs. Now to the dream. I walked into their daughter's room, but when I entered it looked different, like it was how the room used to be before it was converted. In the room, there was a double bed with the headboard on the left wall, a wardrobe on the right side, and a mirror on the wall facing the bed. The window had net curtains, which let in a lot of light. Sitting on the bed was a young girl, around her teens, wearing a lace, old-fashioned style dress. She was looking down at the floor. I said hello, and she replied with a quiet hello back. We had a short conversation, mostly me asking her questions, but she answered me in a very curt way. I asked her if she had any siblings. She said yes, she had a brother and a sister. I asked if she played with them, and she got angry. She told me to leave, then started pushing me and chasing me down the stairs as I ran away. At this point, I knew it wasn't just a regular dream. I saw myself running to my Nan, who was very much alive, and telling her what had happened. She looked shocked and told me I shouldn't have spoken to the girl. She went to try and calm her down, and I saw them on my Nan's stairs, with the girl trying to push my Nan down the stairs just like she had done to me. I woke up suddenly, covering my eyes, but I could see light coming through the blinds, even through the gap in my hands. I was shaken up. Before I went to sleep, I had been trying a technique where I could ask questions in my head to communicate with spirits, and I'd get a yes or no answer. I asked if anyone was there, and the answer was yes. I asked if they were kind, and the answer was yes. I asked if we were welcome, and the answer was no. I explained in my mind that we were staying until Monday, but I didn't get any answer. I went to sleep hoping for the best. When I woke up, my heart was racing. The first thing I did was apologize in my mind for speaking to the girl and promised I wouldn't ask any more questions. I was in the middle of explaining again that we were leaving on Monday, but I wouldn't try to communicate with her again, when I suddenly felt something push on my leg, which was slightly uncovered. It woke me up, or at least brought me fully to my senses. It left me wondering what part of the experience was real and what wasn't. I felt like someone was standing at the end of my bed, and there was a strong feeling of anger radiating from the room. I sat up on my phone for a while, and it was 4:36 a.m. when I looked at the time. I stayed up for about an hour, still feeling like I was being watched, and I was scared something might happen again. I woke up my husband and told him I'd had a nightmare and needed him to protect me. He's a skeptic, so I told him it was just a nightmare and not the whole story about angering a spirit. He reluctantly agreed to let me stay close to him for the rest of the night. Around 6 a.m. I checked my phone, but I'm not sure of the exact time. I woke up to hear banging in the wall and above us. I thought it might be the pipes or the heating, but I listened to it for a while and didn't feel threatened anymore, so I tried to go back to sleep. I woke up to the alarm at 9 a.m., and I was lying in bed reading on my phone when I heard a car pull up. It was our friend's daughter coming home. She chatted to her parents downstairs and then went upstairs to her room. The thing that caught my attention was the sound of her walking on the floorboards. It sounded exactly like the banging I had heard earlier that morning. Now, I'm not sure if this was all just a dream or if it really happened. It felt so real at the time, and it makes me wonder. After that, I didn't experience anything else. I feel like I was accepted by the spirit by Sunday, and nothing else happened. But who knows? It still feels like something real happened that night. This story happened in 1995 when I was a 15-year-old girl working the night shift as a care assistant at a local nursing home. The nursing home was a large, old stone house, built in the Edwardian style, with 3 main floors and a small 4th floor, which had 2 rooms in the attic. Those attic rooms always gave me a creepy feeling. The house was surrounded by a few acres of wooded land, and it could be reached by a long, winding driveway leading up from a fairly busy road, just off into the countryside, near a 12th century castle. My shift began at 7 p.m. and ended at 7 a.m., and surprisingly, the night passed quickly. I worked with one other staff member on my floor, and we were responsible for the ground and 2nd floors. 2 more staff members worked on the 3rd floor, looking after the critically ill residents. There was also a lady in the 3rd floor office, the resident nurse, who covered all floors in case of emergencies. Once the residents were settled in bed around 10 p.m., we would do some cleaning and make our hourly rounds. We would split up, each taking one side of the house, moving from room to room, floor to floor. Then we'd relax in the lounge area, doing crosswords or reading. Every so often, an alarm would go off in one of the rooms, and we'd head over to check on it, seeing if anyone needed help. Like most care homes, there were plenty of ghost stories. Everything from a disembodied leg seen wandering the 2nd floor corridors to cold spots, strange feelings, shadows, noises, and even a cat that would walk around the gardens. On this particular night, it was the same as always. We'd hear shuffling footsteps in the halls and doors opening, but when we checked, no one was there. It would take us no more than 15 seconds to get from the lounge to the corridor on the ground floor, and yet, every time, the halls were empty. Then, one night, an alarm went off in a ground floor room. My coworker and I went to check, heading towards the last room on the right side of the ground floor. We entered quietly and saw the resident was fast asleep. We quickly checked on her, turned off the alarm, and left. But just 10 minutes later, the alarm went off again. This time, we suspected a fault, but when we arrived, the resident was wide awake. She was pointing at the back of her door and saying, "Will you get him out of my room? He's come in here again and is making a nuisance of himself." Now, the residents on the ground floor were fully independent, so we didn't expect anyone to be wandering around. We checked the room, the bathroom, and even the next room, but there was no one there. The resident was becoming more impatient with us, still pointing at the invisible man and having a conversation with him. At one point, she threw her hands in the air, then looked over to the other corner and started speaking to someone else. She asked the unseen person to tell us to stop looking around and to get the gentleman behind the door out of her room so she could sleep. We were starting to think she was hallucinating. We poured her a glass of water and tried to calm her down. Then, something strange happened. The curtains at her window puffed out, yet the window was closed. The door slammed shut, then reopened. We were stunned. The resident, looking slightly annoyed, said, "At least Mavis can get rid of unwanted visitors in the middle of the night. What good are you two?" She then turned and spoke to someone else, saying, "I'm glad you've come to visit, Mavis. Get rid of that annoying old man so I can sleep." The resident passed away a week later, unexpectedly, without any illness to explain her death. She simply drifted away in the night. I later found out that Mavis was her best friend in the home, who had passed away a year earlier. The room she was staying in had once been occupied by an old man who had a habit of playing pranks on the nurses and care assistants, making us run up and down the hall. I often wonder if Mavis and the old man came back to help ease her passing, maybe even to take her with them. That night was when I stopped questioning whether there's life after death and just accepted that there is. My coworker and I were both stunned and had no explanation for what had happened. We didn't speak much about it afterward, but it became just another story to add to the collection of strange happenings in the nursing home. Before I start this strange story, let me explain what a knocker-upper is. A knocker-upper was a job in Britain and Ireland, especially during the Industrial Revolution and even up until the 1920s, before alarm clocks were common or reliable. The job of a knocker-upper was to wake people up in the morning so they could get to work on time. Summer had arrived, and my friends were planning a short trip to visit one of their friends in England. I decided to go with them since one of them mentioned they'd be visiting a haunted spot, and I was curious. We went to a small town called Chagford, located up north in Dartmoor, Devon, near the River Tame. There's a famous church in the area, and it's said to be haunted by the ghost of a young girl from the 1600s. Legend says she was shot and killed during her wedding the moment she stepped out of the church. My friends tried to get permission from the local police to visit the church after midnight, but of course, we didn't get the okay. So, we visited the church during the afternoon instead. We took a lot of photos, hoping to capture something spooky or unusual, but everything seemed peaceful and normal. We stayed at a local friend's house during the trip. That night, we had a wine party, ate fried cheddar, grilled some smoked salmon, and of course, drank a lot. The next morning, I woke up with a headache from jet lag. My friends were all still fast asleep. The house owner was in his room on the main floor. To explain, the house had a basement, 3 rooms, and an attic. The owner's room was on the first floor, where the entrance and living room were. We stayed in the attic, which had an old, creaky window. Our neighbors had a similar house, and when the old window opened, we could hear the sharp squeak of the rusty hinges. I tried to go back to sleep since it was still early, but suddenly, I heard something tapping at our neighbor's window. I thought it might be our neighbor saying hello, so I peeked out the window. Through the old glass, I could see the street, foggy as if we were by the harbor. It was quiet, and I didn't think anyone should be awake yet. I assumed it was just the wind. A few moments later, I heard the tapping again. "Knock it off! It's Sunday!" I heard the old man next door shout. Then, the same tapping started again, but this time it was at our window. I looked outside, but there was no one there. I went back to bed, and then the tapping started again, louder this time. I thought I might still be dreaming. I tried to go back to sleep, but then one of my friends woke up and asked, "Who's F*** king tapping the window?" I sat up, and I clearly remember us both looking out the window. We opened it slowly to avoid the loud squeak of the old frame. Another friend, who was further away from the window, woke up too and asked what was going on. We told him that someone was tapping on our window. He looked out and said he saw a blur, maybe a man holding a long stick. This friend was the one who had suggested we visit the haunted church the day before. My friends always said that he and his family were gifted and could see ghosts and communicate with them. At that moment, he didn't try to communicate with the blur he saw. During breakfast, we told the house owner about what happened early that morning. He shared stories about professional wake-up callers called knocker-ups, who used to wake people up before alarm clocks were invented. The town used to be full of industries, and people needed to wake up on time, so they hired a knocker-upper to make sure everyone was up. I'm not sure if the tapping was the spirit of a knocker-upper, but it was too foggy to see if anyone was playing a trick on us. However, I did know that our neighbor had also been bothered by the tapping.
I'm 23 years old, and I've been with my partner, who is 30, for just over a year now. I want to share that until this point, I've never experienced anything paranormal. But my partner, on the other hand, has had strange experiences in every place he's lived since he was young. A few months after we started dating, I moved in with him. He was living in a small studio flat, which was just one room that had a bed, a sofa, a TV, and a small kitchen along one wall. He had set up the space in a clever way, dividing it into 3 areas: a bedroom, lounge, and kitchen. The bed was on the left as you entered, next to a built-in wardrobe and a little bedside table. In front of the bed was the sofa, and in front of the sofa was a unit with a TV and shelves full of DVDs and games. There was a coffee table between the sofa and the TV unit, and behind it was the kitchen. At first, the strange happenings were small. Things would go missing or get moved around, and we wouldn't find them until weeks or even months later. The flat was small but very tidy. My partner is meticulous about where he places things, especially important items like his keys, phone, and wallet, so it wasn't a case of things being lost in clutter. One night, while we were watching a movie on the sofa, we noticed something odd. On the shelves above the TV, there were 2 plant pots, one holding DVDs and games, the other with tall plants. As we watched, it seemed like someone had slapped the plants because they swayed back and forth, one after the other, before stopping suddenly. We also noticed things would move or fall, even though there was no reason for it. The windows were shut and the room didn't have much airflow, so it was hard to explain. Even though I didn't feel scared, I definitely got the sense that something was there. When my partner, who works as a cleaner, left early for work, I would be alone in the flat until I started my shift. During those quiet mornings, I still felt a presence, though it wasn't as strong as when my partner was around. We lived in that flat for about 4 months before we moved to a bigger place in August 2014. The new flat was a 1-bedroom place with a long hallway and 3 rooms: the living room, bedroom, and kitchen. At the end of the hallway was a bathroom. In this new place, things got even stranger. We both saw shadowy figures, mostly in the living room or hallway, sometimes just out of the corner of our eyes, sometimes directly in front of us. The figure would appear and then vanish, leaving us both feeling uneasy. Things continued to move on their own, and we started hearing unexplained noises, even a voice here and there. There were also mornings when we woke up with strange marks on our bodies, like bruises or scratches, that we didn't have the night before. A few weeks ago, my partner had a very odd dream where he felt like he was being pushed into the bed, almost as if something was crushing him. When I came home from work that evening, he showed me his ring. It had been squashed at the bottom, perfectly shaped like his finger, as if someone had pressed it flat. The night after the ring incident, we were talking about all the strange things that had been happening, and he told me a story from before we met. He had once visited a medium who told him that he had a spirit following him, his younger sister, who had died when she was very young. His mother later confirmed this story. Now, I'm left wondering, is this spirit his sister, trying to protect him? Or is there something else attached to us in the flat?
For years ago, when I was 14, I lived in northwest London. At that time, my best friend Claire, I've changed her name for privacy, had been experiencing a lot of strange, paranormal events in her life. For example, the kettle would turn on by itself in the kitchen, and her kitchen light bulb exploded in the middle of the night on more than one occasion. Claire also told me that sometimes, an extremely cold, wet hand would grab her feet. One night, she even saw a tall, shadowy figure standing by her window, at the foot of her bed. She stared at it until it disappeared. Until then, I had always laughed at her stories, thinking she was just making them up. I never believed in paranormal stuff and had never experienced anything strange myself, until this night. One evening, Claire stayed over at my house, as she often did. We watched movies and funny YouTube videos, nothing out of the ordinary. I had a small wooden red table next to my bed, and my bed was positioned right next to the window. The window faced a wall with nothing on the other side. It was around 11:30 p.m., and we were lying in bed chatting, the lights still on, while everyone else in the house was asleep. Suddenly, a horrible smell filled the room. It was so bad that we both nearly threw up, but we didn't think much of it. After a while, we were too tired to stay awake, so we turned off the lights and tried to sleep. Claire was lying next to the wall, and I was facing the rest of the room. Suddenly, I heard 4 fingernails glide along the table. Claire immediately turned to me and asked if I had heard that too. I didn't answer because I knew if she was asking, it wasn't her playing a prank on me. She sat up and told me we needed to get up because she was really scared. So we both got up, lights still off, and sat there in silence, hoping to hear more sounds and figure out what was going on. A couple of minutes later, we heard a loud bang coming from the wall beside the chair. We jumped up and turned on the light. Where the bang came from, there was a purplish-greenish patch on the wall. I was terrified, tears welling up in my eyes, but Claire told me to pull myself together and not leave the room. We stood by the wall, staring at the patch, when I suddenly felt a cold breath on my neck. I turned around quickly, and what I saw made me freeze. My computer chair was spinning by itself, faster and faster. On the soft part of the chair, a handprint appeared and disappeared every time the chair spun, as if someone was pushing it. I started crying and pointed at the chair, telling Claire to look. She ran over to it, and knocked the chair over to stop it from spinning, but it kept going, even while it was on its side, making a loud noise. In that moment, the lights went out, and we heard the laughter of a little boy and a girl coming from the direction of the chair. When the lights went out, we heard tiny footsteps running toward us, still laughing, until they stopped right in front of us. We couldn't see anything because the light had gone out, but we heard a whisper say, "We play here. Don't make us do something we don't want to do. We've done it before. We can do it again." We both started crying and ran out of the room, straight into my parents' bedroom. We could still hear the faint laughter from my room. I woke my mom up, and she shot up in shock, asking what had happened and why we were crying, looking so pale. We told her everything, but she just brushed it off, saying we watched too many horror movies and needed to calm down. She didn't even check the room. We ended up sleeping in the living room that night, and nothing else happened. The next day, we didn't speak about what had happened. Claire went home, and I never invited her over again. Since that night, nothing strange has happened to me, though I'm not sure about Claire. I still don't know what to make of that experience, but it's the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, and I pray to God it never happens again.
I've lived in this house with my mother for several years now, and over time, we've both agreed that some things here are unexplainable. We live in Stockport, England, on a council estate, which you wouldn't expect to have ghosts or paranormal activity. As far as we know, no one has ever died in this house. I'll do my best to tell the events in order and explain the atmosphere of the house before these strange things started happening. The first odd event happened during the first week we moved in. I was only 5 years old at the time, and it happened in my old bedroom. The room was very small, just big enough for a bed, a tiny dresser, and a small chair. I remember waking up for no particular reason. When I opened my eyes, I was facing the bedroom door. To my shock, I saw my bear suit, which I used to pretend was a cat suit, hanging in midair, held up by nothing. I was too scared to question it and just pulled the covers over my head until I fell back asleep. It's something I've never forgotten because I've never seen anything like it since. A couple of years later, we had more furniture, and the next strange event happened in the downstairs living room. The room was fairly large, with a sofa facing the TV, which was in the corner, and a bookcase next to the living room door. At the time, my mother was cleaning the house and dusting the bookshelves. She was a smoker, and the books had become stuck to the shelves with nicotine. Some of them were so stuck that my mother couldn't move them. She simply dusted around them. I was upstairs, probably using the bathroom, when I suddenly heard my mother shout in pain. When I ran downstairs, I found her clutching her neck, with the books, previously immovable, on the floor next to her. She described how the books had just fallen on her neck as she was dusting. She hadn't knocked anything over, and the shelves were so large that those books shouldn't have been able to fall that far. She was certain that someone had thrown them at her. As I've gotten older, I've tried to find a logical explanation, but I can't figure out how the books could have moved on their own like that. The next event is something my mother experienced when I was about 13. At this point, the atmosphere in the house was very heavy. We were going through a lot of family issues which made everything feel angry and sad, especially for my mother. This was the only time anything like this happened. One night, my mother was standing at the window on the landing, having a cigarette. Our window faces our neighbors, so we could see into each other's landings and bedrooms when the lights were on. As she was looking out, she saw a young girl, with curly hair and a little dress, walk across our landing and disappear into my room. My mother said she immediately felt a chill and was really freaked out. She tried to explain it by thinking that maybe it was our neighbor's child. But when she asked our neighbor if the girl was up late, our neighbor said no. The child was staying with her father that weekend and wasn't home. With no other children around, my mother couldn't explain what she saw. Over the years, the strange feelings in the house have calmed down, but there are still times when it feels off. Sometimes when you walk into the house, you get a sick feeling in your stomach, as if something's not right. It's hard to explain, but it's a feeling that comes with no warning and can be overwhelming. Sometimes when I walk around the house, I feel like I'm being watched, and when I go into my old room, it's especially uncomfortable. There have been moments when I felt an intense need to leave, as if something is telling me, you should not be here. I've grabbed my coat and left for a while, and when I return, the feeling usually goes away. My old room, the box room, has always felt strange. I never felt safe in there, like something was watching me from the end of the bed. I used to tell myself it was just my imagination, but now, in my bigger room across the landing, I feel fine. The box room is now used for laundry and as a storage space for books. Both my mother and I feel uncomfortable going in there, and we always leave the door open when we do. For some reason, we can't stand having it shut. There's something about that room that doesn't feel friendly. Sometimes my animals refuse to go in there, and I can't explain why. It just doesn't feel right.
My Nan says she has this ability where she can hear the deceased. She says my auntie has it, my mom has it, and I also have it. But I don't think I have it as strongly as they do, because I'm not really sure what it is. I can sense when something is around, and I can tell whether it's good or bad. Sometimes, when I'm at home, I know which rooms to go into and which ones to avoid based on how it feels. I'm not sure if these feelings are real or just my imagination, but I do have a morbid curiosity, and I believe that some things can't be explained. I'm 22 years old, work in a funeral home, and I'm an only child. The first strange experience I can remember was when I was very small, right after we moved into our current house. I was about 2 years old, and I used to say that a lady named Rose wouldn't let me sleep. My mom didn't think much of it until she spoke to the neighbors and found out that the lady who had lived in the house before us was an unpleasant old woman named Rose. When I was about 5, on Christmas Eve, I went to bed as usual but woke up in the middle of the night. I couldn't open my eyes all the way, even though I tried really hard. I could vaguely see the room, and at the end of my bed, there was this white mist that was moving up and down, side to side. I thought it was Father Christmas, but now, looking back, I'm sure I was awake. Around the age of 10 or 11, I had another strange experience. I was riding my scooter down the road towards 4 large Victorian houses. I came to the first house and saw a young woman sitting in the window, wearing a white nightgown and long hair, just staring and smiling at me. She was sitting on the window ledge and not moving. I turned to my mom and dad, who were walking behind me, and tried to tell them about her. But they didn't see her. I even went on, still staring at her, but I was getting frustrated because they couldn't see what I was seeing. I rode past, and her eyes followed me, but I wasn't scared, just very curious. I had never seen her before, and I never saw her again. When I was about 12, we had an extension built on the house. Our tiny kitchen was being expanded, and the garage was moved. They had to dig up the foundations beneath the house, and that's when the house started to feel very creepy. My mom believed that one of the previous owners might have lost a baby, and that the baby's spirit was still there, causing trouble. We never found any remains, but the atmosphere changed during the building work. There were little things that happened regularly. I had a lamp by my bed with a paper lampshade, and it made a certain noise whenever you brushed past it. At night, the shade would shake on its own. One night, while I was lying in bed, I felt something in the room. Suddenly, my bedroom door swung open, and the lamp started shaking. I called for my mom, and she swapped rooms with me. During this time, she also complained that her bed would shake, or even lift up. She wouldn't let me move my bed around because whenever we did, the bed would start to lift or shake. When I was 19, my dad's best friend passed away. A month later, I was downstairs getting my bag when I felt something was in the house. I grabbed my bag from near the kitchen door and looked up to see a figure standing in the kitchen. I instantly knew it was my dad's friend, but I didn't feel threatened. The dog suddenly ran past me, barking at the figure, but I didn't stay to look. I just went upstairs and told my mom, and she responded, "Oh, again." At 21, things took a darker turn. My mom disappeared without telling anyone, and when she returned, she refused to talk to me or my dad. One night, we went out to the pub, and I had to relay messages between them. Eventually, I left and went to my friend's house. When I got home, I felt an overwhelming sense that something was wrong. It was a horrible feeling, and I couldn't shake it. The dog refused to come upstairs with me. I heard banging noises downstairs and strange noises outside my bedroom door. Then it stopped. I heard the front door open, thinking my parents had returned, but it turned out to be my nan, who was furious. She told me to get in the car because my mom had run off with another man. My nan, aunt, and dad were all experiencing strange ringing and clicking noises in their ears, and my nan was convinced it was my late granddad, who had passed away when I was around 5. My aunt's house was also filled with spirits, and I could share more about that in another post. More recently, I had another strange experience at work. I was covering a Saturday shift at a different funeral home. The building was large, and everything seemed normal until we got to the chapels. The first chapel was fine, but the fourth one felt incredibly cold and unnerving. I didn't want to go in, but I had to, since we were preparing for a lot of viewings. When I walked into the chapel, it felt colder than the others. A few weeks later, I found out I wasn't the only one who disliked going into that chapel. Other workers had the same feeling. One of the workers once checked the chapel to see if anyone was inside and saw a man sitting in a chair. She thought someone was viewing, but when she asked about him later, no one knew who she was talking about. She went back to check and found no one in the chapel at all.
I'd like to start by sharing something that happened when I was just 3 years old. My parents told me that I used to talk about an old woman who would stand halfway up the stairs. At first, they thought it was just my imagination, that I was probably just playing around. A few days later, before anything unusual happened, I started drawing on some pieces of paper. My parents didn't think much of it at first, but after a while, they realized I was repeatedly drawing the same thing, a completely black figure of a woman standing on the stairs. After this, things started going wrong with my parents' friendships, and we eventually had to move because of all the trouble we were dealing with. The second strange experience happened when I was around 9 years old. I remember it was a cold winter night, and my parents had some friends over. I was really tired, so I went to bed early. Around 10 p.m., I started to feel an eerie, dark presence that I had never felt before. My body went stiff, and I didn't dare turn around as I was facing the wall in my room. For what felt like 10 minutes, I stayed frozen, feeling an overwhelming sense of cold as if all the warmth in my room had vanished. The feeling of dread only grew stronger, and I felt like my energy was being drained. I've never been that terrified in my life. I finally convinced myself that I had to face whatever this was. So, despite my fear, I turned around. What I saw made my hair stand on end. There, standing just beside my bed, was a tall, dark figure, about 9 inches away from me, staring at me. I couldn't even comprehend what I was seeing. Was I just half asleep? But I knew this wasn't a dream. Over the years, I've woken up many times, but I've never seen anything like this. I stared for a moment, completely frozen. Then, I quickly turned around and squeezed my pillow tightly. I couldn't bring myself to look back for at least 20 minutes, feeling wide awake, but too scared to move. When I finally turned around again, the figure was gone. I realized then that I hadn't been dreaming, and what I had seen was real. The third paranormal experience happened not too long ago, and it's been ongoing for about a year now. It's been happening with such strange timing, and I honestly don't know if it's a spirit trying to warn me, or if someone is playing a prank. This has happened to me about 12 times now. It always happens when I go to my window for a quick break. Yes, I'll admit, I was smoking weed. Every time I go to the window, a small rock is thrown at it. I quickly look outside to the left, which is the only direction from where someone could throw something, but every time, there's nobody there. One time, I was watching YouTube while smoking, and the video suddenly stopped. A few seconds later, I heard the distinct sound of a rock hitting my window. I rushed to the window to see if I could catch the person who had thrown it, but again, no one was there. Another time, I was in my room with my mother, talking about spirituality, when it happened again. This time, the rock bounced on the roof of the porch, which is just below my window. My mom could see the direction it came from, and she said she didn't see anyone. I told my dad about all the strange things that had been happening. He used to be a fortune teller, and when I shared my experiences with him, he said, "Something is trying to tell you something." Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.
This is a story about a ghost I consider to be a kind of guardian. Over the past 14 years, I've learned to communicate with him in my own way, and we've developed an understanding of each other. Though most of my interactions with him are intentional, there have been several unexpected moments, some small, and a few major ones. I'd like to share some of the more significant ones. I can't pinpoint the exact date, but I was about 2 years old at the time when we lived in a medium-sized house with a decent-sized yard, surrounded by trees, and it backed onto an open field. I loved spending time outdoors, playing in the garden with my mom. She would often put me on her hip, and we'd pick fruit from the trees that lined our back fence. The back fence was quite low, about 4 feet high, giving us a clear view of the field when I was on my mom's hip. One morning, as we were picking fruit, I saw a man standing on the other side of the fence, about 3 meters away. He wasn't directly in front of us but off to the left. He was just standing there, looking right at me and smiling. He didn't move, just stood there completely still. His skin was pale, and his features were dark. He appeared to be around 50 or 60 years old. I stared at him for a few seconds before I shyly hid my face in my mom's hair. I somehow knew he wasn't like us. When I looked back, he was gone. My mom acted as if nothing had happened and didn't seem to notice anyone. This was the first time I saw him. As a toddler, I would occasionally hear him speak, even though I couldn't see him. His words were often difficult for me to understand, and I now realize that he spoke in a way from his era, slow, precise, and with an English accent, likely from London. The voice matched his appearance, and somehow I knew it was him, even when I couldn't fully comprehend what he was saying. His clothing and hairstyle, which I've later identified as from the 1900s to the 1910s, felt familiar to me. After starting school, I stopped seeing or hearing him, and for years, he was just a strange memory. At the start of 2001, I went through a non-believer nihilist phase. I wanted to try being normal, even though by this point, I had already encountered many ghosts, including a dancer from another experience. The whole non-believer mindset seemed plausible to me at the time, but it never quite sat right. I kept up this phase for about 8 months until one late September Saturday night. I was driving home alone after a party, with hardly any traffic around. As I checked my rearview mirror to change lanes, I saw him, sitting in the back seat, staring sternly at me. To say I was scared is an understatement. I froze. The moment stretched on forever as a streetlight passed over his face. It illuminated his features, and I saw just how otherworldly he looked, just as eerie as I remembered, but far more vivid than I ever expected. I looked back, and he had disappeared. I wasn't far from home, so I managed to hold it together, though I dreaded every mirror check on the rest of the journey. I couldn't sleep that night and spent hours reflecting on everything that had happened, and all the other ghost encounters I'd experienced over the years. That was the end of my non-believer phase. In late 2001, I bought my first digital camera, the kind that wasn't built into a phone. I was so excited to take photos of everything, and one night, I snapped a picture of my bedroom. When I looked at the picture, I saw him. Not his face, but his torso, dressed in his unmistakable old-fashioned clothes. It was clear he was standing right there in my room. I panicked, deleted the photo, and immediately regretted it. To this day, I can't believe I did that. By 2002, the dreams started. They always involved him in some violent way, with me being killed by him, usually in a graphic, painful manner. Despite the terror in the dreams, I never felt threatened by him. I've come to see these dreams as a kind of exorcism, maybe a way of purging my non-believer traits. While the dreams terrified me while I was in them, I always woke up feeling strangely calm. By 2006, the dreams became less frequent and stopped being violent. Instead, they shifted to warnings, usually alerting me to something bad that was about to happen. These warnings weren't about me directly, but often about something else. When I received a warning from him in a dream, I paid close attention, because all of them came true. In 2014, I started seeing him unexpectedly again, particularly when entering my studio. I'd gasp when I saw him, and he'd look toward me, then vanish. It wasn't scary, just a shock. This happened once or twice a month. But these sudden surprises were a bit unsettling, especially because they hadn't occurred before the previous year. In March 2015, something happened that was more intense than usual. I was expecting a friend to drop by and saw her car pull into the driveway. I rushed to the front door to greet her. I have a few quirks, one of which is that I love watching daylight fade, and I always keep the lights off for as long as possible. It was twilight outside, but dark inside. I ran up the hall toward the door. Our front door has a narrow window with a curtain that's usually drawn, but it wasn't at that moment. As I reached for the door, I slammed into someone already standing there. The contact was cold, really cold. I looked up and saw him standing in front of the window, blocking the light. As he spun around, he glared at me. His eyes were wide, and I recognized that look from my dreams. I screamed and, in a panic, pushed him. He shot me a look as if to say, "Right back at you," then disappeared. I was shaking and completely freaked out. I ran outside to greet my friend, who hadn't heard the commotion. I told her what had happened, and she asked, "Who's the guy?" She saw him too, though she hadn't realized it at the time. She said the curtain flapped open when he turned around, which made her look back toward the side of the house, not at the driveway, where I had assumed he was watching. That was the unsettling part. He wasn't there for me. He was watching something else. Later that night, after my friend left, I sat down at the piano to play, trying to calm myself. While I was playing, I felt a hand rub my left upper arm. It was slow and comforting, almost like a gesture of reassurance. It was cold again, but not threatening. I stopped playing but left the sustain pedal down, letting the notes linger. I didn't want to release the sustain, because I feared the silence would feel wrong. I kept thinking, "Don't look at the lid, don't look at the lid," as I raised my hand to touch his. As my hand got closer, he pulled away. It was a strange but peaceful moment, something I hadn't experienced before. I hadn't touched him or been touched by him until that night. Though I haven't seen him since then, I still feel his presence around the house. Maybe he's laying low, but I miss seeing him.
A lot has been happening lately, both comforting and uncomfortable things. Some of these happenings just leave me curious and confused as to why all of this is happening. It's reached a point where it's been overwhelming, and I'm about to share what's been going on and how it has affected me. One day, I was sitting in front of the door to my brother's room, just listening to music and waiting for him to come back. When he finally returned, I turned my head to say something, and that's when I froze in fear. What I saw behind him terrified me. There was a solid figure of a man standing right behind him. I let out a small scream, which made my brother worry and ask what had just happened. I explained it to him, telling him that I saw a man standing behind him. I've never been someone who believed in the paranormal. To see something like this shook me. I've always believed that spirits might be real, but my entire perspective on them changed after this encounter. I'm religious, and I pray more often now than I used to, which has really helped me feel safer and more protected. But this wasn't the end of it. When I found out that my brother had been experiencing the same strange things, we told our mother. She sat us down and explained that she had experienced similar things too. I also learned that when she was trying to get pregnant with her first child, me, she was targeted by black magic and had been attacked by a shadow person. This made me wonder if something or someone, maybe spirits, had gotten through some closed doors. I'm not a professional, but I believe that's a possibility. To be sure, we had our house checked out by several mediums. They all said the same thing, that there was something in the house. But I feel like there's more than one spirit here. One feels good, and the other feels bad. Not demonically bad, but I can sense it. It's a gut feeling. Most of the time, I'll see a black mist pass by in the corner of my eye, but I try to brush it off as my imagination. The spirits tend to contact me in my dreams rather than when I'm awake, though I have seen that solid figure of the man twice in the same hallway where I first saw him behind my brother. At night, I often feel cold touches, especially on the side of my head, and sometimes I get pins and needles in my hands. Recently, I felt completely drained of energy. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't focus. But after a few hours, I felt fine and slept well, though this isn't the first time I've experienced something like this. One night, I was sleeping when I heard a voice whisper into my ear. It was clear enough for me to understand what it said, and the voice had a soft yet slightly harsh tone. It said, "You think you're clever, don't you? I'm stronger than you, girl. Try me." I immediately woke up, my heart racing. I looked around the room to see if one of my siblings had played a prank on me, but then I realized that wasn't possible. My bed was against the wall, and my door is broken in a way that makes a loud noise when it opens. I'm a light sleeper, so there's no way anyone could have snuck in. Plus, I don't sleep against the wall, I sleep away from it, so I would have felt anyone get into my bed. I was completely frozen in shock. All of this is just confusing me. One day, I found myself crying because I didn't know what to do about it. In the end, I decided to keep myself devoted to God. and to follow the light, because I believe that's the only thing that can keep me safe.
In the second week of November, I decided to work out in the lounge room for the first time. Normally, I do my workouts in the bedroom, but for some reason, it never occurred to me to use the lounge, where there's more space. I'd been doing similar workouts since I was a teenager, and I was confident that the bumps and footsteps I felt in November weren't caused by me. I love dancing, and the workout I do is ballet-based. It doesn't require any equipment, and there's no running or jumping. Most of it is done on the floor and is pretty quiet. I mention this because I don't know why it caught the attention of our little ghostly friend. So, the first time I worked out in the lounge, I'd been at it for about 10 minutes. I was doing a stomach exercise where I lay on my back with my knees bent and legs apart in a 10 to 2 foot position. I'd seen this exercise on TV aerobics shows, but the ballet version is slightly different. In this variation, you raise your pelvis off the floor, then come down without actually touching the floor. You stop just shy of it, keeping the muscles engaged. Your feet are in a demi-point position to keep the muscles active. So, there's very little contact with the floor and hardly any noise. But then, I started feeling vibrations through the floor, like something was running around the room. It was light, like a dog or a cat. It happened in bursts, and it kept going for the rest of my workout, stopping when I finished. I thought maybe it was our neighbor's dog, but I hadn't felt it before, and we never noticed the neighbor's pets through the floor. But then again, maybe doing an exercise on the floor made it easier to feel it. The next day, the same thing happened, but I paid closer attention. A lot of the workout is spent stretching and flexing, so I could focus more on the vibrations. It felt like a small dog or a cat running around in short bursts. I could also tell where it was coming from, and it felt a bit unsettling when it got closer to me. But other than that, I wasn't too bothered. The day after that, I tried something different. Before starting, I lay on the floor and waited for vibrations or footsteps. For about 2 minutes, there was nothing. I began my warm-up, stretching and some standing exercises. No bumps. But as soon as I got into the workout, I could feel quick, light footsteps again, just like before. I was doing leg exercises, where you lift your leg and stop just shy of the floor, then bring it back up again. It was confusing when I started feeling slight bumps in the floor, where there shouldn't have been any. I moved on to another leg exercise, rotating my leg in circles while keeping it straight. As I was doing it, I felt the bumps again, and it distracted me. I couldn't concentrate on the movements, and even forgot what direction I was rotating in. Frustrated, I decided to speak out loud. I assumed it was our little brownie, the spirit that often hangs around, so I addressed it. I said something like, "Hey, little guy, I'm doing an exercise routine here. I've been doing it for years. It might look strange or painful, but it's actually good for me. You might not know, but I used to do this upstairs in the bedroom. I prefer doing it down here now." As soon as I said that, the bumps stopped, and I haven't felt them since. I think maybe brownies don't like changes in routine. They're known for being methodical and temperamental, but we love ours. What gets me is how the brownie must have been alerted to my change of location. I guess I gave off a different energy while working out, and the little guy came to investigate, probably wondering, "What on earth is she doing?" Maybe that's it, but it's kind of funny to think about. My workouts usually last around 30 to 40 minutes, and during the 3 days this happened, I felt the bumps and vibrations in short bursts throughout. It seemed like they were coming mostly from the doorway, then up toward the bathroom. I would feel another burst closer to me in the lounge, and sometimes it would come at random spots. There might have been a pattern, but I didn't really focus on it. It's hard to pay attention to bumps while holding a position for 30 seconds and counting sets. Our brownie usually hangs out in the bathroom and kitchen. We've heard the lounge door creak open and close slowly, but we've never seen anyone do it. It could have been any of our ghosts though, and that happened even before I started working out in the lounge. Maybe the little guy was already hanging out there, and I just didn't notice. Or maybe I gave off a different energy he wasn't used to, and he felt the need to investigate his perceived territory. We've never heard any brownie-like activity in the bedroom. He seems to prefer downstairs. I'm still curious about what the brownie was doing, running around like that. Maybe he was jumping up and down, telling me off for changing up my routine.
This happened to me and my family in 2012 while we were on holiday in England. We were staying in an old farmhouse in Northampton for the week. When we first arrived, everything seemed normal, and the farmhouse felt nice and cozy. After a long day of traveling, we were all pretty tired, so we went to bed early. The next morning, during breakfast, my mom told me she hadn't slept well. She said she woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of someone shuffling their feet across the carpet. At first, she thought it was my dad getting up to go to the bathroom, but when she looked, he was fast asleep next to her. After that, she quickly pulled the covers over her head and tried to fall back asleep. Later that day, my brother, dad, and I went into town to get a takeaway. My mom stayed behind to read her book. We were only gone for about half an hour, but when we came back, my mom told us she felt uneasy, like someone was watching her. A few minutes after that, the room started to feel really cold, so cold that she had to take the covers off the bed. The next morning, she told us again that she was woken up at 3 a.m. by the sound of shuffling feet. I told her to try talking to whoever it was and ask them to stop, and she agreed to try that night. When we all went to bed that night, my mom seemed more relaxed. She told me she said what I had suggested before going to sleep. This time, she didn't wake up at 3 a.m., and she slept through the night. We went out for the day, and when we came back late, we were all sitting in the living room, but I could feel something staring at me from the hallway. I took out my phone and snapped a picture, but I didn't see anything. I decided to take another photo to check, and in the second picture, I could clearly see a man's face hovering over my mom's head. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I didn't want to freak anyone out, so I didn't say anything. A few minutes later, my mom asked me to go into her bedroom and take pictures with the lights off. I agreed and went in, closing the door behind me. It was completely dark, and I started taking pictures, but I felt really uneasy. Then I suddenly felt a sharp pain in my lower back. It came on so quickly, and it was really strange. I decided I had taken enough pictures, so I left the room. As soon as I stepped out, the pain in my back faded away. I looked through the pictures I had taken, but I didn't see anything unusual. After that, we all went to bed. I started feeling uneasy again, just like when I was in the bedroom. I tried to brush it off as I got ready for bed. While I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom, I felt like someone was in there with me, like I was being watched. I ignored it and went back to the bedroom, where my brother was already asleep. I climbed into bed, but suddenly, the bottles on the dresser under the window moved. I looked over, and there was an old man with a bushy beard staring at me. I realized it was the same man I had seen in the picture earlier. I looked over at my brother, hoping he was still asleep, and he was. When I looked back at the dresser, the man was still there. I said hello, but he didn't respond. Then he just faded away. The next day, we went to visit some family who lived nearby. We had to drive about an hour to get there, and as we were driving, I suddenly felt like something was in the car with us. I looked around, but I couldn't see anything. I just knew something was there. When we arrived at my family's house, we were eating and chatting, but I could still feel something in the room with us. I looked around, but again, I didn't see anything. A little while later, my mom wanted to take some pictures, so I offered to take them. I took 2 pictures of my parents with our aunt and uncle, and when I looked at them afterward, I saw the same face hovering over my mom's head. It was the same man from the picture and the bedroom. He had followed us to my family's house. I couldn't believe it. The next day, we left the farmhouse and went home. I was relieved that the old man didn't follow us back. My mom, however, was glad to leave. She hated that house and said she would never go back.
When I was younger, I lived on Portland in Dorset, England. Portland is a place with a lot of supernatural history, and many strange things have happened there. This story is about one of the spirits I encountered while living there. When I was about 14, we got a horse and kept him at a stable on the island. The stables were near some old, abandoned windmills. In the UK, buildings over a certain age can't be torn down because they are considered historically important. The windmills are believed to be from the medieval period and are surrounded by fields, but they're not too far from the village. Anyway, we got our horse in the summer, so at first, I didn't need to be at the stables after dark. But when winter came, it started getting dark around 4:30 p.m., so by the time I finished my after-school clubs and went to the stables, it was already dark. One evening, while I was filling up a hay net, I suddenly felt like someone was watching me. My mom is particularly sensitive to paranormal things, and I seem to have inherited that sensitivity. I could feel that there was a teenage boy, around 13 years old, watching me. I couldn't see him, but I could tell he was there, staring at me. He didn't scare me, but I quickly left, finished what I needed to do in the stable, and then headed down the track to wait for my mum to pick me up. Over the following days, his presence was there whenever I filled up the hay nets. But every day, it felt like he was getting closer. By the weekend, I could feel him even during the day. I started seeing him out of the corner of my eye. He was tall and thin, with dark hair, wearing a white shift shirt, brown trousers, and no shoes. The more I saw him, the more visible he became. It started to worry me. While he didn't feel malevolent, his presence was becoming intrusive, which I wasn't used to. I hadn't mentioned anything to my mum yet because I didn't like talking about supernatural things, especially since I found them unsettling when I was younger. But one evening, as I was getting into the car, my mum asked if anyone else was at the stables that evening. I told her that I was the last one left, but she seemed uncertain and asked if that was really true. I hesitated and then admitted that I was the only person there, but I felt like something else was in the yard with me. My mum then told me she knew about the boy and shared her own experience with him. She believed he was from the 1500s and had visited the yard before, though no one had ever noticed him. She explained that because I could sense him, his presence became stronger over time. A couple of nights before, she had gone down to the stables to look after my horse for me. She said she felt him follow her down to her car, but she wasn't bothered by it. However, when she sat in the car and turned on the engine, she looked out the window and saw him leaning over, staring directly at her through the car window. It startled her, and she quickly drove away. She also mentioned that she had seen him follow me down the track to the car, but he stopped halfway. Hearing that really scared me, but my mum told me to talk to him. She said I should tell him that I was glad he was excited that someone had noticed him, but that it was a bit scary. The next time I saw him, I said what my mum had told me to say. Since then, I only ever felt him watching me from a distance.
I had several strange experiences at our house. Both my husband and my son said they had seen a man in dark clothing walk past the back of the house. My husband said he always felt uneasy, especially at night when he was in the back garden with the dog. He even described feeling threatened. I never experienced anything myself and didn't see anything until one sunny afternoon in April. I was cleaning the kitchen counter, facing the small window that overlooked the back garden, when I saw a movement. A solid figure, wearing a gray-colored jacket, passed by the window on the left. My first thought was that a strange man was walking around our house. I quickly turned to my left and looked out of the larger kitchen window, hoping to see him. But nothing. I looked back through the smaller window to see if he had doubled back, but again, no one was there. I went outside through the back door, which only took a few seconds, and walked around the entire house. I even looked up and down the main road at the front, but no one was in sight. We often had tourists who mistook us for a hostel, and strangers sometimes walked up to our door. So I assumed it was just someone passing by. However, I never actually saw the man pass the window from left to right. I only saw his back as he had already passed. He was close enough that I would have noticed him at first. He would have blocked the light, and there was no way he could have disappeared that quickly, considering the way the house was positioned with walls and fences. My husband and son continued to see this dark figure pass by the house many times. Was it the same man I saw? I don't know, but I never saw him again. Another time, I was walking into the kitchen and saw a wooden toy train being pulled around the corner of the door into the kitchen. It happened in a split second, but I clearly saw that it had two carriages attached and was painted in pale pastel colors. We didn't have any small children at the time, and there were no toys like that in the house. I told myself I must have imagined it. There were also several times when I thought I saw a black shadow darting around the back of the house, near the bathroom and kitchen, almost as if it didn't want to be seen. I kept dismissing it, refusing to believe in it, until my husband had an experience that confirmed it for me. On our last night at the house, my husband stayed alone, as he had to catch the ferry the next morning with the last of our things. He sat in the empty house and watched a tall black shadow walk casually through the wall from the back of the house, across the living room, and into the wall leading to our front bedroom. He spent the rest of the night sitting in the car at the ferry terminal. We also had a problem with the electricity. The prepayment meter was using up an unusually high amount of electricity. Even in the summer, when there was no heating on and no one was home all day, it would still be using tons. We called the company to ask if we were being overcharged, and they told us that our property was on a watch list because of the high usage. They said that not even 10 short circuits could use that much electricity. The house needed a lot of modernizing. For example, within the first 6 months of living there, our microwave, 3 toasters, and 4 kettles all broke down. We lived in that cottage for 3 years, and during that time, my older son had many unpleasant experiences. My younger son was adamant he had seen a young boy outside the porch, even though it was a pitch-black, snowy night. There were no footsteps in the snow, no sign of a car, or anything else. We checked the whole area, but there was nothing. At one point, I used a voice recorder in my older son's room when the activity had gotten worse for him. He had often seen a woman in his room, and once, he even had an encounter with an aggressive male figure. I asked typical questions, though I felt silly and scared to hear a response. The only word I heard was yes when I asked if she had died in the house. My son had said he wasn't afraid of her, but she did make him jump. I then helped him ask the lady to go to the light, as I'd seen on many TV programs, hoping it would help ease his mind. Interestingly, after that, he never saw her again, so maybe it worked, whether it was his imagination or not. I can't share all of my son's experiences unless he decides to post them himself, but I can tell you my side of them. I'm just so glad we left that house. We were always feeling drained and depressed. I've read that negative energy can affect people, and I'm sure we experienced that, whether it was paranormal or some kind of natural/man-made energy. I can say with certainty that we won't be going back, at least not to that house.
In February 2009, we moved into a small rented cottage on Sandy, an island in Scotland. It was a very cold, snowy day. We hadn't seen the house before we moved in, which, looking back, was a mistake. The cottage was in poor condition, with sagging roof timbers, damp walls, old electrics, and a very dated, dirty kitchen. The only heating source was a coal fire in the living room and 3 old 1970s heating panels. But the rent was incredibly cheap, and it was the only place we could find at the time. My husband and I took the bedroom at the front of the house, which had no heating except the coal fire, which we quickly discovered couldn't be used. The warmest bedroom was at the front of the house, where my 2 sons, then aged 13 and 11, temporarily shared a room. The small back bedroom became my older son's once we installed a small halogen heater. This room, next to the kitchen, was an extension built around the 1930s, which separated it from the rest of the house, but my son liked the privacy it gave him. At first, nothing strange happened. We were busy settling in. The first summer passed, and then the cold came again, along with the long, dark nights. One morning, my older son came out of the shared front bedroom, before he moved to the back bedroom, and said he had woken up in the night to see a person standing at the foot of their bed. He thought it was me checking on them, as I sometimes did, so he ignored it and went back to sleep. But I hadn't gone in to check on them, and neither had his dad. I just dismissed it as a dream he had. He wasn't worried about it, and my younger son didn't mention anything unusual. A few weeks later, I was alone in the house, taking a bath. I glanced down at the shiny chrome taps near my feet and saw the reflection of a woman standing in the open doorway, watching me. She was dressed in colorful clothing, kind of 70s style, I guessed. I quickly turned my head to the doorway, but no one was there. The image in the tap had gone too. I had been feeling like I was being watched before, but I had dismissed it. After that, I never took a bath alone in the house again. On another occasion, I was alone again, sitting at the computer, trying to sort out an issue with my eBay account. Suddenly, I heard the loud sounds of a woman sobbing. The sobbing seemed to be coming from my youngest son's bedroom, just to the right of where I was sitting. At first, I thought it was the wind, but I looked out the window, and nothing was moving, no branches or blades of grass were stirring. This was unusual because of our location. Anyone who's been to the islands knows what I mean. I started to feel nervous but listened closely, trying to figure out if it was a woman, a radio, or something else. The sobbing grew louder and became a heart-wrenching wail. It sounded like the woman had suffered a terrible loss, like the loss of a child, though I had no idea where that thought came from. I suddenly realized that I had a tape recorder in one of the drawers at my desk. I tried to grab it without disturbing the sobs, but as I feared, the sounds stopped as suddenly as they started, and the house became eerily quiet. I stayed still for a few minutes, hoping the sobbing would return, but it didn't. I cursed myself for not being quick enough to record it, but when I checked the drawer, I found the recorder wasn't there. It had been moved, probably by my older son. I checked the bedroom and outside, but everything was quiet, as usual. That sobbing haunted me, especially since it happened just months before my daughter tragically lost her premature baby daughter, my first grandchild. The baby was born too early, and although she was flown to Aberdeen, she only lived for 48 hours. I was with my daughter the whole time. I can't help but wonder if the crying I heard was some kind of omen. The night before it all happened, I also swore I felt a small child's finger touch the palm of my hand while I slept. I remember telling my husband in the morning that I hoped it wasn't an omen for the unborn child. Part of me knew something was wrong, but I chose to ignore it. Was this experience connected to the loss, or was it just a dream? It felt cold and real enough to wake me, but dreams can feel very real at times.
When I was a little girl, around 3 or 4 years old, I had an experience that I still remember clearly, even though it was a long time ago. I lived in East Anglia, not far from the starting point of the River Thames. The county I lived in is known as one of the most haunted places in England, which might explain why I had this experience. We lived in a small rented house that had once been a council house. It was very cramped for our family of 4, with hardly enough space. One night, I was lying in my bed, not quite tired enough to fall asleep. The hallway light was on because my little brother hated the dark and would have nightmares if it wasn't. I didn't mind the light. In fact, I liked it because I could see if anyone walked past my bedroom door on their way to the bathroom, which was right next door. Then, out of nowhere, a dark shadowy figure entered my room. I knew it wasn't just a shadow from one of my family members because of the way it moved. It was too slow and blurry to be a normal shadow. The figure walked toward the bottom of my bed and stood there for about 10 to 20 seconds, just swaying. I didn't feel scared, though. I actually felt calm, as if it was someone I knew very well. After it disappeared, I got out of bed to see if anyone was there. My brother was fast asleep, and my parents were in their room, also asleep. The bathroom was empty too. This happened about 17 years ago, and we moved out after less than 4 years, but I'm still curious about the house's history. I tried searching online for information, but I couldn't find anything useful. Most websites wanted money for information. I did find a few stories from people who said their relatives came back after dying to say one last goodbye. I don't think that was the case here, though. None of my grandparents or aunts and uncles had passed away at that time. The only person I could think of was my granddad, who died before I was born in a terrible car accident. He was only 40 years old. 4 people were in the car, and 3 of them survived, but sadly, my granddad wasn't one of them. Maybe it was him who came to visit. I like to think it was. Another strange experience happened when I was about 14 or 15. I went on a weekend camping trip with some friends by the sea. We stayed in a house with 4 bunk rooms. My first reaction when I walked inside was how cold it was. It was typical British summer weather, not warm or bright, just cloudy and chilly. The building had central heating, but it didn't seem to help. I thought it might be because of the big window next to the stairs letting in the cold, even though it was tightly shut. But being a teenager, I didn't want to make a big deal of it and just ignored the temperature. After a long day of activities, my friends and I went back to the bunk room for a girly evening. There were 4 of us and the room had 4 bunk beds, so we each took one. We were chatting and being loud in bed when I stood near the door to act out something funny. Suddenly, the light in the room went off by itself. I was confused, but I quickly turned it back on. One of my friends accused me of turning it off, even though she could see I wasn't near the switch. I tried to convince her that I hadn't done it. Then, right at that moment, the light went off again. I thought it was funny, but the other 3 girls were really freaked out. After that, the light stopped going off. We decided to go to sleep around 11 p.m. We all went next door to the bathroom to brush our teeth. While I was in there, I suddenly felt very uneasy. It felt like something was watching me from behind the toilet stall. I became nervous, but I tried to joke it off to my friends. It didn't help. I just wanted to finish and get out of there quickly. We went back to the room and fell asleep by 11:30 p.m. Sometime after midnight, I woke up because the bed started shaking, but I was the only one in the bunk bed. I brushed it off, thinking it was just a dream. The next morning, the staff member came over to ask if everything was all right. We said yes, but then she told us something that shocked me. She said she had heard crying coming from the bathroom next door at 1 a.m., but none of us had gone in there after 11:30 p.m. the night before. I don't know what happened, but I do know one thing. I never want to go back to that place again.
This story goes back to 1999 when I was living with my husband and 6 children. Our youngest child was born the following year, and at the time, my husband worked as a long-distance truck driver, so he was often away. That left me to look after our children on my own. In the summer of 1999, we moved into a small rented cottage in Lancashire. It wasn't a big place. Originally a council house, it was cramped for our family of 8. The house had sagging roof timbers, damp walls, old electrics, and a very dated kitchen. The only source of heat was a coal fire in the living room and a few old 1970s heating panels. But the rent was very cheap, and it was the only place we could find at the time. My husband and I took the bedroom at the front of the house, which had no heating apart from the coal fire, which we soon discovered didn't really work. The warmest bedroom was at the front of the house, so we let our 2 sons share that room. The small bedroom at the back of the house eventually became my older son's room after we put in a small modern halogen heater. This room was next to the kitchen, separated from the main house by a corridor. It was an extension built in the 1930s, and my son liked the privacy it gave him. At first, nothing strange happened. We were busy settling in, and the first summer passed. But as winter came, the long, dark nights started to creep in. One morning, my eldest son came downstairs, looking shaken and with tears in his eyes. He told me that while he was upstairs, he had heard a woman's voice whispering something in his ear, but he couldn't make out what it said. I assumed it was a dream, but he was really upset, and my younger son hadn't said anything. A few months later, my friend Jeanette came around one evening. She had a few glasses of wine, while I had a soft drink. We were catching up and having a good time, and she left around 11:30 p.m. I went to bed shortly after. At 4:45 a.m., I was abruptly woken by the sound of breaking glass downstairs. My heart was pounding, and I was heavily pregnant at the time, so I thought someone had broken into the house. I gathered the courage to go downstairs, and when I entered the kitchen, I found two wine glass stems standing perfectly upright on the sink drainer, while the broken tops of the glasses were rolling around. I was baffled. I didn't have any pets, and all of the children were still asleep upstairs. I couldn't think of any logical reason for what had just happened, especially why the stems of the wine glasses would remain upright. I always felt uneasy in that house, like I was being watched. After living there for 3 years, we decided to move to a larger house. My husband and I bought a hairdresser shop and converted it into a 7-bedroom house. One evening, around 10 p.m., while my husband and I were discussing plans for a new kitchen, we suddenly had something thrown at us from the 20-foot-long hallway. A handful of Skittles, Smarties, and about 50p worth of small change. My husband quickly ran down the hallway and upstairs, thinking it was the children messing around. But when he got upstairs, he found all of our children fast asleep in their beds. This happened in a 3-story house, and my husband had run up 2 flights of stairs, yet there was no sound of footsteps or laughter. It was just as if someone had thrown the items at us, but there was no one there. Over time, many other strange things started happening in this house. There were knockings on my daughter's window in the early hours of the morning, usually around 4 a.m. She would look out each time, but there was no one in sight. One night, my husband was watching a movie alone when he saw a black mass about 7 feet tall and 4 feet wide moving down the 30-foot-long living room toward him. He panicked, but it just faded away when it got about 6 feet from him. These strange events would happen in waves, quiet for weeks or even months, then they'd start again. We eventually became somewhat complacent about the paranormal activity. We moved again, and in our new house, we realized we had brought something with us. We heard knocking on the windows again, and once more, we had Skittles, Smarties, and small change thrown at us while we were planning to decorate the hallway. Our children were asleep upstairs, and their bedroom doors were clearly visible and shut. We also heard whispering close to our ears, both male and female voices. When my daughter was 14, she started hearing what sounded like a child running along the roof of our garage conversion, which had been turned into a bedroom for her. Christmas was approaching, and my husband and I decided to buy our children chopper bikes. My daughter insisted on keeping her new bike in her downstairs bedroom because she was so excited about it. One night, she was awoken by something being thrown at her bike. Upon investigating, she found a pair of tiny black boots, about 2 inches by 3 inches, lying next to her bike. They had a wooden inside with a rubber outer coating. They looked like they might have come from a Pinocchio-style toy. We threw the boots away in the trash, and the bin men took them with the weekly collection. But years later, we moved to Lytham St. Annis in Lancashire. After 3 years, we moved again, this time to North Devon. We lived there for 8 months, but we couldn't settle, so we moved back to Lancashire. One morning, my daughter came to me and said, "You won't believe what I found on my bedroom windowsill." She showed me the little black boots we had thrown away years earlier. We continued to see black figures and hear what I could only describe as a death groan from a male entity. The knocking on the windows continued too. On several occasions, when we put an unused bar of soap in the bathroom, something seemed to attack it during the night. The soap would have male finger-like indentations wrapped around it, and once, it looked as if it had been scratched with a dinner fork. This happened 6 times over 3 years. Our little Yorkie dog, who has since passed away, was always terrified when the living room door was opened. She would run and hide in the kitchen. I suspect she had seen something that we couldn't.
This story happened a while ago in my street in Liverpool. I was just a kid in the early 2000s, and me and my friend were always up to the usual things when we played outside. It was autumn, and the clocks had just gone back, so it was around 8 p.m. when the strange things started happening. My parents had gone out shopping, leaving me and my friend in the house for a few hours. We were just watching TV and messing around like typical kids. As the night went on, we started hearing noises coming from directly above us, my parents' bedroom. We lived in a semi-detached house, and at the time, the house next door was empty and in complete darkness, so we knew the noises weren't coming from there. We ignored it at first and carried on, but the noises started getting louder. What started as soft footsteps turned into the sound of something being dropped. By this point, we were both freaked out, and we decided we had to go investigate. As we climbed the stairs, the noises suddenly stopped. I was convinced someone was in the house and knew we were coming. I told my friend to go ahead, and we even grabbed a hammer and a broom, just in case it was a thief. When we reached the landing, my parents' bedroom door was slightly ajar, and we could see a little inside, but there was no one there. We stopped for a moment, frozen with fear, unsure of what to do. Then, as we both started to climb the stairs again, the door suddenly swung open on its own and slammed shut with such force that we thought the door would come off its frame. At that point, we had seen and heard enough, so we ran straight out the front door and across the street to my friend's house. I was in hysterics, being so young and scared. We sent my friend's dad over to check the house. He searched every room, the back garden, everywhere, but there was nothing. So, we were totally freaked out. I refused to go back inside until my parents returned. So, I waited in the street with my friend, and eventually, his younger sister joined us. We kept talking, trying to calm down, but my friend's little sister kept saying she saw something moving past the windows of my house. I thought she was just trying to scare me, but it turns out she wasn't. Reluctantly, we decided to go back to my house. As we were talking and walking up the street, we both suddenly looked at each other and then at the stained glass window of my house. At the exact moment, we both saw what looked like a tall, dark shadow moving past the window and up the stairs. The color drained from both of our faces, and it completely terrified me. I started crying again. After all of this, my parents didn't believe us, of course. But since then, things have been quiet, with only small things happening like creaking sounds and electric appliances turning on by themselves. Whatever it is, I don't think it's harmful. In fact, it feels like it's watching over me and my family. We even gave it a name, Shadow Man. We lived in our house for nearly 20 years, and it was about 150 years old. From as far back as I can remember, strange things always happen there. Footsteps in the hallways and loud bangs at night. When we first moved in, we were all scared by these noises, but as time passed, we just got used to it and ignored it. Visitors often mentioned hearing the footsteps and bangs, and we would joke that we had a resident ghost. The only time someone actually saw the ghost was when my great-grandmother came to stay for a few days. My mom was talking to our neighbor in the kitchen, and when the neighbor left, my grandmother asked who the man standing behind her was. My mom told her it was just her and the neighbor in the kitchen at the time. I'll never forget how my grandmother's face turned pale, and she didn't speak for the rest of the day. The next morning, she decided to cut her visit short and left. We also had about 5 babysitters who refused to come back after spending a night looking after us. My sister had an even more alarming experience. One evening, she was alone in her bedroom, watching TV, when an ornament on the TV flew off and hit her. None of us believed her at the time, but to this day, she's adamant it really happened. From then on, we started calling her room the ghost room. Years later, I had been living abroad for 4 years, and when I returned home, I moved back in with my parents while I looked for a place of my own. By this time, my brother and sister had moved out. My mom kindly made up a room for me, but it turned out to be the same room my sister had called the ghost room. At first, nothing unusual happened. After about a week, I was in bed watching a TV show called Most Haunted. If you've never seen it, the show features a team investigating haunted places and asking questions like, "Is anyone here?" Or, "If there's spirits, please make a noise." After the show ended, I turned off the lights and TV, preparing to sleep. About 5 minutes later, while I was still wide awake, something tapped me on the shoulder, 3 very clear taps. I was completely terrified. I switched the lights back on and searched the whole house, but it was empty. I couldn't shake the fear and stayed awake for the rest of the night with the lights on. I thought maybe the spirit had heard me watching Most Haunted and thought I was asking if anyone was there, so it responded. I felt like it knew I knew it was there. For the rest of the time I stayed in the house, about 4 months, I was woken every night between 3 and 4 a.m. by the same 3 taps on my shoulder. It became a regular occurrence, and I started to get used to the lack of sleep. When it happened, there was always a dark, almost tangible presence in the room. One night, I gathered the courage to ask out loud if there was anything I could do to help, or if it could stop waking me up at 3 a.m. That only made things worse. Instead of just tapping, it started pulling the duvet off me and whispering things in my ear that I couldn't understand. I decided to move to another bedroom in a newer part of the house, hoping it wouldn't follow me there. Unfortunately, it did. You might wonder why I stayed in the house for so long, even with all of this happening. The simple answer is that I didn't have anywhere else to go. During the last week of my stay, I ended up sleeping in a tent in the garden. Thankfully, the presence didn't follow me there. My parents thought I was crazy at the time, but I never told them what was going on because I didn't want to scare them. The last bit of the story happened years later. It was Christmas, and after a few drinks, I finally decided to tell my family everything that had happened. As I was finishing my story, my brother's girlfriend looked visibly terrified. At that exact moment, the TV flickered and the power went out in the entire house. After that, I think most of my family believed me. As for my brother's girlfriend and the other guests, they never stepped foot in the house again.
This story goes back to when I was young, around 3 or 4 years old. I've always been able to see spirits, but when I was living in Portsmouth with my mom, dad, and 2 brothers, I started to feel like someone was watching me. By the age of 6 or 7, I started seeing a man. He always appeared as a faint figure, standing at the end of my bed, just watching me. I didn't feel scared at first, but I did feel a mix of fear and anger whenever he was around. One night, I remember frowning at him while lying in bed. My bed was under a window ledge where my dad had put an old metal curtain pole. After I frowned at him, I saw him walking toward the head of my bed. Being young and scared, I quickly pulled the covers over my head. When I peeked out, the curtain pole fell directly onto my head. By the time I looked up, the figure was gone. My parents tried to get rid of him, and they often heard heavy footsteps coming from my room. After a while, my parents separated, and I moved in with my dad. The strange things continued. I couldn't see him anymore, but I could always feel him watching me. I'd hear the sound of footsteps walking around my room when I was downstairs. We all heard it, but no one could explain it. We eventually moved to Essex, to a 3-bedroom house. As I got older, I could feel his presence more, though I still couldn't see him. It became so intense that I didn't want to get dressed unless I had something covering me. The footsteps in my room became more frequent and louder. One day, during a PE class at school, we had to do yoga. While lying down, eyes closed, I suddenly felt someone staring at me. I opened my eyes and saw a tall man with short dark hair leaning over me. I couldn't see his face, and I panicked, sitting up quickly, but there was no one standing near me. That was the first and last time I actually saw him. When I turned 17, my dad kicked me out, and I moved in with friends. The strange presence followed me wherever I went. I stayed with a good friend and her mother for about 6 months. During that time, the sound of footsteps grew louder. No matter which bed I slept in, whether in the same room as my friend or in a spare room, it felt like someone was jumping off the bed I was sleeping on. Later, I moved into shared accommodation. The presence still followed me. Everywhere I went, it was there, always making me feel both scared and angry. I had my best friend stay at my place while I went on holiday for a week. When I returned, she told me she had felt like someone was standing at the end of my bed, just like the figure I had felt for years. I hadn't told her anything about it before, and she had no way of knowing. After not seeing my mother for years, I reconnected with her and moved back to Portsmouth. Of course, the spirit followed me there too. There were a few nights when it got especially intense. I could hear tapping on the doors, windows, and tables, and I felt like something was stroking my face and holding my hands. The dog wouldn't leave my side. He was growling and barking for no reason, and everyone else was asleep upstairs. I felt a lot of presence around me, and it didn't feel pleasant at all. The TV would also mute itself, which made the situation even stranger. The spirit is still with me today. I can definitely feel his presence, but I don't feel scared anymore. I've seen different people, including psychics, and many of them have told me things that they couldn't possibly have known about me, things that felt very personal. One lady, while I was having my aura photographed, mentioned the tapping sounds, saying something was trying to get my attention. Another person said he wasn't my spirit guide, but that he wouldn't harm me. They described him as an angry man with a military background. I don't feel scared around him anymore, but I do feel like he's watching over me or taking care of me. I want to know who he is and why he's following me. Is he someone I know? Maybe a family member I haven't met? I've been told he's an attachment, but I'm still unsure. I've tried meditating and inviting him to communicate with me, but it felt like I wasn't supposed to speak unless he wanted me to. During one meditation, I saw him more clearly than before, an angry man who doesn't want to hurt me, but still has an intense presence.
This happened when I was about 7 or 8 years old, and I was in London with my mum. Ever since then, I've been unsure about what I saw. I used to think it was a ghost, but now I'm not so sure. It might have been something else. Let me explain. For those who don't know, an underpass is a small tunnel that runs under a busy road where there are no bridges or traffic lights for pedestrians. They're usually covered in graffiti, full of rubbish, and often poorly lit, with lights that sometimes don't even work. I was used to them, and so was everyone else. They were common, nothing unusual. So, here's what happened. It was a normal day, and there were a few people coming and going, walking through the underpass. Nothing strange was happening. But then, out of nowhere, I suddenly felt really panicked. I wasn't the type to feel anxious or have panic attacks, but something didn't feel right. We kept walking, but I felt increasingly uneasy. I could see the people ahead of us coming toward us, but because the light wasn't great, I couldn't make out faces. All I knew was that I felt unsafe and became more alert to the people around me. Then I saw them, a woman and a young boy. When they came into a better lit part of the tunnel, I got a clear look at them. The old woman had long gray hair, a little matted, and a small smile on her face, though her expression was determined. She didn't look around, just walked straight ahead. But it was the boy that made my heart race. As soon as he came into view, I saw that he had no eyes, just black holes where his eyes should have been. The feeling of panic inside me instantly skyrocketed. But then, the worst part happened. As soon as I noticed that he had no eyes, he turned his head and looked directly at me. It was as if he knew I had seen him. I was completely freaked out. I told my mom what had happened, and she quickly turned around to look, but within seconds, she said she couldn't see anyone like I described. She told me to hurry up, and we kept walking. At that moment, I felt completely scared and confused. The fact that no one else noticed them, especially my mom, made it even more unsettling. There was no reaction from anyone around us. People don't just walk past someone who looks unusual like that without at least glancing. But no one noticed them at all. Even my mom, who should have seen them when she turned, saw nothing. I didn't look back after that, but I still felt the fear in my chest. I know some people might say it was just my age, the location, or that I had an overactive imagination, but I'm pretty sure what I saw was real. Later, I learned about the BP phenomenon, black-eyed people, and now I'm starting to think that what I saw that day might not have been a ghost after all. BPS are usually described as normal-looking people at first, but their eyes are completely black, no whites at all. They're often described as having an unsettling presence, and people feel a strong sense of fear or unease when they're near them, even before they see them. What happened to me in that tunnel seems to fit the description. I felt intense fear before even seeing the boy. When I looked at him, I saw black eyes. Perhaps I mistook them for the boy having no eyes at all. He looked directly at me, as if he knew I was aware of him, and no one else around me noticed a thing. Everyone just carried on, as if nothing was strange. I used to think the boy was a ghost, but now, after learning about BPS and hearing other people's stories, I believe what I saw might have been one of them. The strange, ominous feeling I had before seeing him, the fact that no one else noticed, and the way he looked directly at me all make me think he was part of that phenomenon. So, now I'm not sure whether what I saw was a ghost, but I'm more inclined to believe the boy in the tunnel was a black-eyed person.